Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 76 to 100. C76, Buses. Today Bai Zimin had also made sure that Kong Lan spent the 2 daily activations of her lesser healing skill on his left hand, and although she had again exhausted almost all of her mana, the results were as surprising as the first time since his wrist had recovered between 80% and 90%, which meant that he only needed to be treated for 1 or 2 more days before fully recovering. Less than a week to recover from such a serious bone fracture. In the previous world, such a thing was simply unthinkable even with the most advanced medical treatments. But now, thanks to Bai Zimin's constant evolution, Kong Lan's high magical power and her lesser healing skill, it was something that was happening before everyone's eyes. After a sleepless night, there was still a lot of work to do, so everyone woke up very early in the morning as soon as the first ray of sunlight came out. Just like the day before, after breakfast, the group of evolved fighters split into 2. One group led survivors to work with the flesh of the blazing beetle, and the other smaller group began to clear out the larger zombie waves blocking the way to the exit. The only difference was that this time the formation of the groups was different. The day before, because they were still unsure of the effect of the mutated insect meat, Shang Guanbing Shuet, who was the person who had come up with the idea of eating it and conducting an experiment, had to be present all day. However, now that the doubts had been cleared up and they finally realized that the area around the pharmacy building was relatively safe, there was no longer any need for such protection. Therefore, Shang Guanbing Shui had also begun to clear the road leading to the parking lot where the school buses and other cars that in the past belonged to students or teachers were located. After a full day, the group went back to rest, and when they woke up the next day they split up again to continue working. *******. 10th day since the arrival of the soul record on Earth. After a little more than 3 days of cleanup, Shang Guanbing Shuet, Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, and Zhongda had finally wiped out all the zombies in the southwestern area north of the university. Moreover, after being constantly healed by Kong Lan and thanks to his high health, Bai Zimin's broken hand had finally recovered completely, and he could move it so normally that no one would believe him if he said that a week ago his bones had almost turned to dust. Oh! This will make the trip so much easier. Chen he exclaimed happily as he looked at the more than 10 buses and hundreds of cars neatly parked. Because the parking lot was underground, the zombies in this place were very few, and after some easy work, the area was cleared. If it weren't for the lack of amenities that prevented a human being from wanting to live here, this place could be considered the most suitable in the entire university. In fact, this solves a big problem. Bai Zimin nodded in agreement and sighed with secret relief. In order for his long-term plans to work properly, Bai Zimin needed help from other people. Besides, if he didn't help human beings whenever possible, then who was going to run the factories, water dams, and power plants as well as many other systems when the world recovered? He couldn't do that, therefore, even if the safety of other people was not especially his concern, it was a task he had to accomplish. So far, the group of survivors rescued by Bai Zimin and the rest numbered around 500 or 600. However, getting them all out of the university would be too great a challenge. But with the addition of this fleet of buses, this problem had been almost completely solved. Hey guys, bring those things and the tools. Liang Peng waved his hand and shouted toward the other corner. His loud voice echoed everywhere, and if there was a zombie hiding it would undoubtedly have been attracted. Under his call, a large group of men dragged several metal pieces over a meter long that contained other smaller metal pieces inside. These metal pieces were, naturally, the shell of the first order blazing beetle. After several days of work and effort, the more than 3 meters tall and more than 5 meters in length of the beetle had completely disappeared. Its flesh was being properly preserved, the shell had been saved, and even the large legs had been taken to the gymnasium to be turned into weapons later. As for the meat, everyone was surprised the first time they tasted it. The mutated elephant beetle meat was not only delicious and tender, but when they consumed it everyone received some stat points, increasing their natural health by a couple of points. Even Bai Zimin received 1 health point back then. Although it was a pity that it only worked once, as they ate more of that meat a normal person's body would become much healthier naturally, which was amazing. Seeing the amount of shell parts, Bai Zimin stretched his body and his bones thundered as he said, "All right, time to start working." More than 20 male students nodded and began to inspect the buses together with Liang Peng and Bai Zimin. This group consisted of people with some experience in mechanics and all of them came from working backgrounds. "I think we should remove the front bumper which is practically plastic and exchange it for a metal one." "No, why don't we better create a pointed platform that covers the front and leave just the front window uncovered?" "But that would waste too much material and I'm not sure it would be enough with the shell we have now." "That's true. Not only that, the gears could come loose if we take the whole carcass apart." As he looked at Bai Zimin and Liang Peng fervently arguing with the other male students and naming words unknown to him, he couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Before the world suddenly changed, he was a model student who aimed to become someone important in the government in the future. In addition, because his family had enough money, he also didn't need to get a job, so he didn't have any knowledge about mechanics or automobiles. In the past, he drove a car that cost over 2 million Chinese yuan and if it needed to be repaired he would take it to the best service. How could he understand what they were talking about then? In China, a mechanic was a job generally chosen by unschooled people and people generally did not look favorably on them. However, in this new world, knowledge of mechanics was countless times more valuable than the political knowledge he had acquired. What was previously viewed with somewhat disdainful eyes was now needed and praised, while what was once praised and a symbol of pride was now useless. C77, modification completed and troubles. Wu Yujin seemed to be able to understand the thoughts of her childhood friend, but in this case there were no words that could lift anyone's spirits. After all, he had always been outstanding in everything, and now that he was completely overshadowed, naturally it was too abrupt a change for him and it would take time for him to get used to it. In fact, many of the girls who previously seemed to have some sort of feeling or admiration for him could not help but look at him again and compare him with Bai Zimin unconsciously. If it were 10 days ago, Bai Zimin would not even be worthy of a second look from the several beautiful women among the survivors, but now everything was different. Many could not help but wonder, in a world where death is as natural as breathing, is it better to pursue a handsome man or a man of greater capability? He was, of course, skilled. It was just that Bai Zimin was too overpowered. "I'll go scout the exit path to the south," he said before turning around and leaving the scene, deciding that it was better to do what he asked to do. He too had his own strengths and it was better to appreciate them rather than demean himself. Time passed quickly, the morning was over and the afternoon was half over, but the sound of hammering, drilling, grinding, welding, as well as the sound of wheel nuts and screws falling to the ground could be heard everywhere in the university's subway parking lot. The group of about 22 people worked almost without rest and only stopped to eat when they were hungry, because the sooner they finished the job the sooner they could leave the university grounds and finally get to know what the situation was like in the outside world. Apart from the 22 experienced in mechanics, there were also many more people helping to hold the metal parts in place or reaching for the objects and tools pointed out by any of them, which sped up the work process a lot more. One thing worth noting was that when they started working, Bai Zimin, Liang Peng, and the other 20 students received the following message, but with some differences. In the case of Bai Zimin in particular, it was this: "You have learned the unclassified passive skill repair level 5. The soul record was an unknown entity that recorded all the experiences in the soul of each existence and converted it into statistics and skills capable of being evolved and studied in greater depth. Therefore, as people with experience in the field of mechanics, they naturally acquired a corresponding skill." Something similar had happened with the female students and male students who had helped in the kitchen. They acquired the passive skill cooking, and the level of the skill depended on the personal ability of each of them. The amazing thing about the soul record was that each person's ability could grow much faster compared to the past thanks to the existence of mana. The more they cooked, the more the cooking skill of those in charge of the kitchen grew steadily, and the more they hammered, the more the repair skill level of those they were modifying increased. This was another wonder of this strange unknown entity known as the Soul Record. The appearance of the current buses was quite different when compared to the classic buses that were parked several hours ago. In the past the vehicles were much safer from a certain point of view, as they were made of almost pure iron, while today's vehicles were made mainly of plastic and even fiberglass in some cases, which improved the appearance and comfort. Therefore, to better adapt to this new world and to everyone's needs, the front part of the buses had been almost completely removed and replaced by a large metal plate that left only the window and the headlights uncovered. In addition, all the other glass windows of the buses had been removed and replaced with a blazing beetle shell plate on each side. Although it was a pity that most of the metal hard shell had been used, the overall security of the 10 buses had taken a tremendous leap forward compared to the previous ones. Finally done. Bai Zimin looked at their work with a touch of satisfaction. Even though they didn't have all the necessary tools, it had turned out really well, and the 10 luxurious-looking buses now looked like 10 steel monsters. Good job! Wu Yujin approached with a small bottle of water and handed it to him with a charming smile. Thank you. He thanked her and smiled politely back before he began to survey the surroundings as he sipped water slowly. Bai Zimin saw that it wasn't just Wu Yujin. Gao Min, Li Na, Fan Wu, and many other students were handing out small closed bottles of water to each of those who helped modify the buses. At this point, everyone knew that they had to help in any way they could, not only to exponentially increase their chances of survival and improve their lives, but also not to be expelled from the group. Even those who were unwilling to leave the safety of the enclosed places worked as long as it wasn't something that required going out in the open. Now we can finally get out of here. Shang Guanbing Shui's voice sounded from behind, and when Bai Zimin turned around he saw her slowly approaching as she looked at the buses before looking back at him. Good job! Although her voice was cold, at least she sounded sincere, and it would be a lie to say that Bai Zimin wasn't secretly surprised. This was the first time he had heard her say small words of praise, or at least towards him. While it wasn't much, it was a breakthrough as a group. It was what Bai Zimin believed. Yet, he replied briefly, and before the conversation had a chance to progress, a roar from outside silenced all sound underground. Roar! Not good! One of the survivors in charge of standing guard near the entrance shouted in fright, Chen He is fighting an ape over 10 feet tall. They are currently heading this way. Hearing the students' scream of terror and remembering the earlier roar, the survivors' faces turned pale as a sheet, and they quickly ran to the back and deeper part of the subway. Some of them fell to the ground, and a few were even stomped by those behind, being seriously injured and even dying in the process. After all, a stampede of over 500 people was no joke, and most of them had thought that Chen He was an invincible existence, but since an ape forced him to retreat to this place, it meant that he was weaker, which made the survivors think that they were going to die. Liang Peng, Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, Zhongde, and Kong Lan quickly began to help those who could help and to beat up those who became disobedient or wanted to incite chaos in any way. This had been one of the rules and ideas that had been put forward not many days ago, and for the first time it was being implemented to avoid major panic. An ape of more than 10 feet? Chen He? First order. Bai Zimin's mind flashed with that thought, and only now did he realize that the handsome archer was nowhere to be seen. Whoosh! Before he moved, a breeze rushed beside him, and the next thing Bai Zimin saw was Shang Guanbing Shui dashing at full speed to the exit. Her speed was at least 8 or 9 times faster than a normal person before the apocalypse, which meant that her agility stat was at least between 80 and 90 points. Although he was surprised, he also charged towards the exit. Like Shang Guanbing Shui, Bai Zimin was clear that it was absolutely impossible for Chen He to cope with a first-order existence on his own. Although the archer had become more powerful after absorbing some of the first-order anti-magic zombies' soul power and defeating other enemies over the past few days, it was still not enough for him to survive against such a confrontation. C78, Absolute Regeneration. The sound of roars and bangs was the first thing Bai Zimin could make out as he approached the exit of the subway parking structure. Furthermore, although it was barely distinguishable due to the overwhelming sound of what he assumed were the mutated ape's attacks. Bai Zimin could also faintly feel the sound of the wind being pierced by what he thought were Chen He's arrows. A split second later, Shang Guanbing Shui's cold voice reached his ears, followed by a roar from the mutated ape. Obviously her attack had managed to inflict enough damage for its roar to change. 2 seconds later, Bai Zimin finally reached the surface and his footsteps paused for a moment to take in the surrounding situation. After all, he didn't want to die shamefully by rushing into battle without knowing what exactly was going on. The first thing that came into his line of sight was an ape that was clearly taller than the previous survivor had announced. Instead of 3 meters tall, the mutated ape easily reached 4 meters and its muscles were explosive enough to crush a house with its fists. In addition, the mutated beast was covered in a large amount of silver-colored fur that glistened in the rays of the evening sunlight, giving it a majestic appearance. However, the ape's body was wounded. There were at least a dozen arrows firmly stuck in the beast's abdomen, chest, arms, shoulders, and legs, causing blood to flow constantly from those small holes. Bai Zimin narrowed his eyes and noticed that those arrows were not normal. A faint light of light blue shone on the outline of the arrow, which kept them steady and undestroyed by the fierce movements of the mutated ape. It must be the treasure Chen he obtained. Probably something that boosts his attacks in some way. Bai Zimin thought as his sight moved at lightning speed to the semi-frozen limbs of the giant ape. Bang! The giant ape brutally slammed the floor right in front of him and Chen he hurriedly jumped to the side, almost getting crushed in the process. He stood up instantly after and ran several meters before pulling out an arrow from the quiver behind his back and firing it at full speed. When the arrow touched the bow, its dark brown color turned the same as the other arrows that were stuck in the mutated ape's body, confirming Bai Zimin's theory about boosting power. As for whether it was a treasure or a skill, he didn't know. Freeze! Shang Guanbing Shui's voice attracted his attention and Bai Zimin arrived just in time to see a small golden-colored stick shooting out a blast of icy air. Roar! The ape roared and its wild movements slowed a little but still noticeably. Around its fur, Bai Zimin could see from a distance how some parts had frozen or were still in the process of freezing due to the icy air from before. A magic wand? Bai Zimin had that idea as he looked at the small stick in Shang Guanbing Shui's hands. He assumed that instead of increasing strength like his Xianyuan sword, the magic wand should definitely increase magic and mana or one of both stats. Instead of interrupting, Bai Zimin watched the battle unfold as he also wanted to see how strong Chen He and Shang Guanbing Shui had become over the past few days. The battle was quite close. The giant ape was pretty fast and seemed to be completely focused on hunting Chen He, who was shooting arrows every time the opportunity presented to him instead of going after Shang Guanbing Shui, who was the person that really threatened its life. Bang! 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 Several 1- or 2-story buildings in the surrounding area were crushed under the giant ape's heavy and powerful fists or its agile kicks that seemed to contain the flexibility and speed of a whip but the power of a giant mace. Bai Zimin was sure that even he would be seriously injured if he received one of those blows directly. Chen He might not be able to compare with Bai Zimin, but he was certainly not weak by any means. The damage from his strange arrows was little but slowly accumulated and the giant ape was losing more and more blood. Moreover, when it seemed that he was about to be crushed, he somehow managed to escape at the last second by using the terrain to his advantage. Of course, the reason why Chen He could stand his ground and fight without having to run away as he did before or without being killed was all thanks to Shang Guanbing Shui's timely support. Otherwise he would definitely not be able to do as much against the giant ape, considering that he was currently already at his limit even with support. The giant ape's movements had slowed down by at least 60% and great parts of its body had been frozen with small icicles of ice. In addition, Shang Guanbing Shui occasionally set up small ice traps to restrain the monster or shot sharp ice pikes, creating small wounds and freezing the blood inside little by little. Unfortunately, Bai Zimin knew that it was not so simple to end the life of a first-order existence. Because the giant ape had yet to show any skills. Indeed, Bai Zimin's thoughts proved to be true not long after. Roar! The ape stopped its movements and raised its head to the sky as it roared fiercely. Its silver fur that had been soiled with its own blood and the areas frozen by Shangguan Bingshue's magic spells were surrounded by a strange white light that flashed with such fervor that it seemed to want to compete against the sun, forcing anyone who looked directly at it to close their eyes. When the bright flash calmed down and everyone was able to open their eyes again, Chen He could not help but take several steps back as Shangguan Bingshue's eyes widened slightly in disbelief. "I see. So that's the skill this ape obtained when it advanced to first order." Bai Zimin muttered to himself and couldn't help but secretly feel a bit of fear as he realized what the giant ape's skill was. The giant ape's skill was very simple. It didn't increase its strength, nor did it increase its speed or defense, nor did it give it any kind of elemental control. It was a skill that could only be used on itself. Regeneration. The skill that the giant mutated ape had acquired during its evolution gave it the ability to recover from seemingly any wound. What was worse than a strong enemy? A strong enemy that could recover from the wounds you had inflicted on it after working so hard and risking your life so many times to do so. The silver fur that was covered with blood and ice patches now looked perfect as if it had never faced any enemy in the first place. However, Bai Zimin noticed that the beast was breathing erratically and the madness in its eyes seemed to have dimmed, being replaced by tiredness. C79, Becoming Stronger Bai Zimin. Although the active skill of the giant mutated ape was undoubtedly powerful to the point that it could make an enemy despair after a close and hard battle, it was also a skill that consumed a great deal of mana and probably stamina as well. At least this was the conclusion to which Bai Zimin himself had come to after studying every sign shown by the beast after the activation of the skill. The monster's body was no longer firmly standing, its limbs trembled slightly, its breathing was agitated to the point where steam was coming out of its nostrils, etc. These were all signs of exhaustion. However, Bai Zimin narrowed his eyes and realized that Chen He only had about 3 or 4 arrows in his quiver, which meant that he could no longer continue fighting. Furthermore, Shangguan Bingshui herself had exhausted quite a bit of mana and although she could still stay in battle, her chest was also rising and falling somewhat erratically with each of her breaths. Although they could not defeat the mutated giant ape, if it were another beast the odds of being victorious would probably be higher or lower depending on the type of enemy and its skill. The problem with first-order creatures was that you never knew what you were going to face until you faced it. The giant ape suddenly turned and began to run south. Considering its height and its human-like and even more flexible mobility, it was only a matter of time before it disappeared from everyone's sight. Shangguan Bingshue's face turned ugly as she saw her prey about to flee. She had expended 70% to 80% of her mana, but she was confident of overcoming. However, if the giant mutated ape wanted to flee, she had no confidence in being able to stop it. Chains. An indifferent voice sounded from the back, near the entrance to the subway parking area. Chen He and Shangguan Bingshui did not need to turn around to know who the owner of that voice was after having lived and spent so much time together for almost half a month. Whoosh! 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 Suddenly, the blood that the giant mutated ape had lost during the battle moved strangely, and as if they were snakes with a will of their own, they rose from the ground and began to surround the beast's limbs. 2 red chains that glowed like rubies coiled tightly around the upper limbs while 4 chains clung tightly around the lower limbs of the giant mutated ape, sealing its movements. Roar! The beast looked towards the source of mana's movement required for magical activation and roared with bloodshot eyes as it struggled with all its strength, causing the blood chains to begin cracking violently. However, the current Bai Zimin was no longer the same Bai Zimin from before, who barely had any knowledge about mana and his skill. Reinforce! Bai Zimin muttered under his breath, and the blood on the ground merged with the already formed bloody chains, repairing the cracks and making them stronger. For the past few days, Bai Zimin had been practicing control over mana and his blood manipulation practically non-stop, only stopping to sleep and to eat his daily meals. The rest of the time was spent by him using zombies as a source of training. At first, it was difficult and extremely frustrating to see how his efforts were worthless. Then, he couldn't help but think in Shangguan Bing Shui and noticed that every time she created something out of ice she would say the name of her creation out loud, or when she sent the ice bullets flying she would wave her hand. It was then that an idea flashed in his mind and, copying her ways, he began to train by saying the name of what he was imagining every time he used his blood manipulation skill. In doing so, Bai Zimin was pleasantly surprised to realize how much easier it made his task, as he could divert more of his focus to the mana within his body to resonate with that of his surroundings, and the activation of his skill consumed significantly less effort and mana than normal. After approximately 3 days of virtually non-stop training, the fruits of his efforts began to slowly manifest, and at this point he was shining. Seeing Shangguan Bing Shui and Chen He fighting, Bai Zimin realized that both of them, especially her, were strong to the point of being geniuses. But in fact, the difference with him was still quite large. With such a difference in power, there was no need to hide his power so much, and the more he showed the better it would be, as the less they would dare to plan against him in the future. He threw a bottle of blood into the air and stretched his hand upward as he slowly said, "Spear." Bang! The bottle exploded and the liquid blood was surrounded by a wave of mana. In less than a second the blood coalesced and hardened, taking the shape of a firm, pointed spear over 2 meters long. This spear even had a faint red glow around it, since he had consumed over 80 mana points to make it. One could imagine the hidden power of the weapon. When the blood spear fell into his hands after descending, Bai Zimin brought his right hand with the spear as far back as possible just above his shoulder, and with his left foot he took a big step forward, turning his body 360 degrees, and after finishing the turn the spear shot forward at full speed. However, before the spear completely left his hand, the blazing ring in his right hand flashed and a crimson flame covered the spear in its entirety. Boom! With almost 100 strength points and having expended almost the same amount of mana, the spear created with the Shadow Tiger's blood raised a small boom as it went beyond what the surrounding air pressure was able to withstand. A crimson line filled with burning heat closed the distance in a second, and before the giant ape could react the spear had firmly penetrated its head. But that was not all. Boom! The spear filled with fire-like energy blasted and the beast's head exploded into countless pieces. The pieces of burnt flesh and the smell of blood floated in the air. The blood chains holding the beast upright vanished and the practically headless body fell noisily to the ground, collapsing onto a pile of rubble and raising a cloud of dust in the process. Chen He's eyes and mouth were wide open comically, and the disbelief in his gaze expressed how great was the shock he had received. Tap! 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 Shangguan Bing Shui turned her head slightly towards the source of the sound of light footsteps, and her blue eyes shivered for a moment as she saw the relaxed smile on the face of the young man behind her. Bai Zimin had a casual smile and even rested his free hand comfortably inside his pants pocket as if what he had just done was no big deal. He became stronger in this week, was the thought of Shangguan Bing Shui and Chen He as they recalled what they had just witnessed, both feeling complicated emotions. C80, critical hit. Indeed, Bai Zimin had become stronger than he was several days ago. His physical or magical stats had not changed in any way, and he had not leveled up either, since he was currently in a vortex which once completely overcome he could evolve into a more powerful existence, but in the meantime, he could not acquire any power boosts. In fact, he had not even used his available status points in any way to boost his natural stats. However, in this world there were many ways to become stronger without leveling up, without acquiring soul power or stats, even without treasures or obtaining skill scrolls. One of those ways was to learn and use what one already had in the most optimal way possible. Bai Zimin was training precisely to become stronger in this way, and although he still had a long way to go, it was undoubtedly a breakthrough compared to the past. In addition, Bai Zimin had also been practicing other types of attacks using the skills he had along with his treasures, creating amazing effects. In fact, the previous attack was just an improvised blazing blood spear. But he had planned something much more powerful by making use of those two skills and adding something else as an intensifier. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Platinum Ape level 37. You cannot level up or obtain additional stats before you get the first order job. You have learned unclassified passive skill level 5 throwing. 3 glowing orbs filled with soul power came out of the lifeless body of the first order platinum ape and went into the bodies of Bai Zimin, Shang Guanbing Shui, and Chen He respectively, the size of the orbs being quite similar to each other with barely any almost indistinguishable difference. In addition, another message flashed in Bai Zimin's retina. Although he was somewhat surprised, the surprise was not that great since he had somehow expected something like this to happen. The reason? Of course, the beautiful and seductive Lilith. She had explained to him more about the world of skills, and thanks to that now Bai Zimin's knowledge had increased as a consequence. A person could not only learn skills by training but could also learn through skill scrolls after defeating enemies, and skills could evolve. However, there were exceptions to this rule. Ignoring the world around him, Bai Zimin took a look at the new skill as this was something he was looking forward to because this skill would be of great help for his evolution to first order. Throwing, unclassified passive skill, level 5. When throwing an object with your bare hands you have a 20% probability of dealing a critical hit to the enemy. This skill has reached its maximum point and cannot evolve on its own. To some extent, it was also something that he already expected. However, the impossibility of evolving alone was something that surprised him, and now he finally understood several things that Lilith had explained to him about the soul record and the skills. Apart from the individual stats, there were also other stats that were not displayed in the window of each person or intelligent creature. An example of this was the critical hit statistic, defense, attack damage, etc. To acquire these stats one needed to obtain certain skills or certain items that were usually not formed after the defeat of an enemy and the intervention of the soul record in the soul power of the loser. For example, a blacksmith or artifact maker could create weapons, armor, accessories, which increased physical damage or defense but did not increase stats such as strength or stamina and health that treasures created from soul power could increase. Lilith said that the higher existences referred to these statistics as tracking statistics as they could only constantly track these statistics by looking at one's skills and equipment. This was precisely the reason why such jobs or classes were considered a rarity and prized on all worlds, since the soul record was a righteous entity that allowed anyone who had talent and used it in the right way and with the right materials to become powerful. Even someone who did not have the courage to fight powerful enemies could become empowered as long as they knew or possessed a class of artifact crafting or blacksmithing and similar. Bai Zimin sighed as he realized how many things he had yet to know and how many other things he had yet to come into contact with. Although he might seem extremely strong, even though it was true that Lilith's advance information was very helpful to him, the reality was that all this also had a counterproductive side effect, and that was that he started to realize early on that what weighed on his shoulders was bigger and bigger than he had imagined at the beginning. Bai Zimin, are you okay? Bai Zimin snapped out of his daze and looked back with a casual smile. Why wouldn't I be? I didn't even face that ape head-on, and all I did was deal the final strike. Is that so? Shang Guanbing Shui furrowed her eyebrows slightly before nodding, if you say so. For a moment she had seemed to see him depressed, which had struck her as peculiar considering the overwhelming strength he had just demonstrated and how easily he had claimed the life of the First Order Platinum Ape. Even if it was true that the beast had been largely exhausted by her and Chen He previously, a First Order existence was still a First Order existence, tired or not. But she soon rejected that thought after hearing his reply and took it as a wrong thought of hers. Bai Zimin bent down and picked up the 3 objects dropped by the Platinum Ape. Surprisingly, the First Order beast had dropped 3 items, a skill scroll, a red orb, and an orange orb. Chen He, is it okay if we divide these 3 treasures and then tell us what happened? Yes. Chen He nodded with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, leaving the university might be more difficult than we thought, and those 3 treasures, regardless of how weak they are, we will certainly need them. Bai Zimin and Shang Guanbing Shui looked at each other for a moment before looking back at Chen He with a frown. Apparently, things were much more complex than they had previously expected. A normal treasure, a rare treasure, and a skill scroll. Let's see what kind of skill it is. Bai Zimin put the victory loot on a large pile of rubble that had collapsed and grabbed the skill scroll to see what skill it was before passing it to the rest. Regeneration, First Order Active Skill, Level 5, regenerates stamina according to the mana consumed. Every 2 mana points regain 1 stamina point. Bai Zimin couldn't help but frown hard at the sight of the skill that had formed after the sublimation of the Platinum Ape's remaining soul power. This was something he definitely did not expect, and honestly, the skill looked quite weak compared to his blood manipulation, even though they were skills of the same level and order. Flash! Flash! After 2 small squeezes, the 2 orbs burst into flashes of orange and red light before 2 new objects appeared on the pile of rubble. XIETIAN, Human and Demon, Part 1. The objects that had appeared after the disappearance of the 2 flashes of light were 2 treasures that until now Bai Zimin had not seen appear from orbs and therefore did not possess. The treasure that came from inside the orange orb was a kind of dress that looked more like a robe such as the immortal women wore in light novels, but not as extravagant. Curious, Bai Zimin touched the tip of the deep blue dress and, apart from the softness of the material, the information of the object flowed into his retina automatically. Combat robe, rare grade treasure, full body dress capable of blocking normal edged weapons and even smaller caliber bullets. When wearing it, all stats plus 5 automatically. Basically, the combat robe was a somewhat similar extension of his full coat, except that it was more geared towards women in this case. Although there are some differences in the description of the treasure, Bai Zimin thought that the differences were probably not that big. The second treasure was, surprisingly, a crossbow that glowed with a metallic hint at the sun's rays that bathed the material. This treasure was created from whatever it was. Quick crossbow, normal grade treasure, a crossbow that can load up to 5 bolts or arrows in the chamber and shoot twice per second. When equipped, it automatically increases agility by plus 5 points and strength by plus 2 points. So, Bai Zimin looked at the 2 people beside him and asked while scratching his head with one hand, "How do we divide these things?" Shang Guanbing Shui and Chen He looked at each other for a moment before looking at the 3 objects on the pile of rubble, falling into a deep state of contemplation. After several minutes, Chen He shook his head and pointed at the crossbow. "I really need a better weapon at the moment. Even if I know I will change it sooner rather than later, I need to survive until then, or else what sense would everything else have?" Bai Zimin looked at Shang Guanbing Shui and noticed that she was looking at him with narrowed eyes. More precisely, she was not looking at him, she was looking at his coat. "Cheap for you, Bai Zimin." Shang Guanbing Shui sighed and pointed at the combat robe. As Chen He said, "Although I really want that skill, since as weak as it looks it definitely can't be that simple, I need to survive first to then have a chance to find out, and although it's frustrating, I still don't possess enough power to feel 100% confident." In fact, both Chen He and Shang Guanbing Shui were tempted to choose the first order skill max level regeneration. After all, the reality was just as Shang Guanbing Shui had said, a skill of such a level and order definitely could not be simple in any way, no matter how useless it seemed, and it was most likely that in higher orders it would shine and show its splendor. Unfortunately, neither of them felt comfortable with their current strength, and their confidence in surviving greater challenges was not very high, as it was still difficult for them to kill first-order existences, and every time they compared themselves with Bai Zimin they felt worse. This was especially true for Chen He. By acquiring the combat robe, the stats obtained by Shang Guanbing Shui would be the equivalent of 5 levels, considering that each level up granted 2 status points and, more importantly, safety from smaller caliber bullets and bladed weapons such as knives and the like. Meanwhile, by acquiring the quick crossbow, Chen He would not only get a weapon much more suitable for combat but would also receive a total of 7 stats, especially his agility stat, a stat which was technically one of the most important for him. "Then I'll be rude." Bai Zimin nodded with understanding and took the scroll to himself with an indifferent expression. "Good for you, little Zimin." Lilith, who floated a short distance away, congratulated him. Her gaze was fixed on the scroll in Bai Zimin's hands and her eyes had a strange glint in them. Bai Zeman said nothing, and after wishing, the scroll disappeared from his hands and a rune began to form deep in his soul. The rune was yellow in color and had strange cracks that he could not understand what they meant. Soon, the rune had fully formed and Bai Zeman had finally acquired his second active external skill since the arrival of the soul record on Earth. The regeneration active skill was extremely weird. At least, what Bai Zeman expected from a skill with that name was that it would grant the ability to heal wounds or increase health, considering that was its function when the Platinum Ape used it. Obviously, the skill scroll had nothing to do with the Platinum Ape's skill except, perhaps, the name. Regenerating stamina was actually extremely useful because if a battle between two existences went on too long due to identical or two equal strengths, the winner would be the one who could stand for the longest amount of time without faltering in their attacks. However, temporarily it was something that Bai Zeman did not need, and even less so considering his high natural stamina, which, in fact, was his highest body stat, leaving aside stats like mana and magic. I'll look at the evolution requirements of this skill later. Bai Zeman thought before looking at Chen He and saying, "Let's go to the parking lot and talk there." From your words earlier it seemed to be serious. Che He nodded with a serious expression, "I agree." With nothing more to say, the trio walked underground again. ******. When Bai Zeman returned to the subway parking lot together with Shangguan Bingshui and Chen He, none of the three expected to see such chaos. Liang Peng, Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, Zhongde, and Kong Lan were moving all over the place, beating up several people and throwing them aside before moving on to the next person to perform the same action. Some survivors even seemed to have been possessed by some kind of mindless spirit, as they even forgot who Liang Peng and the rest were. They actually dared to try to attack them. It was as if for a moment they had forgotten that they were evolved people and not existences that they, normal people, could deal with. What? For a moment, Shangguan Bingshui looked so shocked that she didn't know what to think about it. Especially seeing the more than 5 obviously lifeless bodies that had been trampled beyond recognition that looked like they had been stampeded by a pack of wild beasts. Bai Zeman didn't understand what was going on either. It had only been 5 minutes at most since he had left, but how did things turn out like this? At the end of the day, humans are animals too, Bai Zeman. Lilith appeared beside him and spoke in an indifferent voice, "In the face of the fear of death, even cats are willing to fight dogs, let alone beings with intelligence who are even more aware that death means the end." The fact that this lower existence named Chen He showed himself incapable of defeating that ape caused many people to fear for their future, and they began to cause chaos, letting out their inner demons. What will you do now? C82, Human and Demon, Part 2 last. Hearing Lilith's words, Bai Zeman's expression changed several times as he looked at the scene in front of him until finally, a flash of resolve shone in his eyes. He began to step forward slowly, and Shangguan Bingshui as well as Chen He called out to him a few times, but he ignored them both, completely focused on the sight before his eyes. A male student suddenly grabbed the arm of a female teacher and threw her to the ground harshly. The woman in her early 30s screamed in terror, but her cries for help and pleading were ignored amidst the chaos where similar scenes were constantly happening. The male student jumped on top of the woman and began tearing at her clothes with an ominous grin. His eyes seemed to be bloodshot as he shouted and cursed, "Even that stupid dog Chen He was defeated. It's only a matter of time before we're hunted down too. At least I'll have some fun with you before I get killed by some monster, ha ha ha." Earlier, when the survivors heard that Chen He was in danger of being killed and saw the look of dread on the face of the student who was standing guard near the entrance, most of them thought they were going to die. As for those who were naturally calmer, they were swept away by the fear caused by seeing the behavior and hearing the cries of others. Only about 5 minutes had passed since then, but there were more than 20 people who had been killed in some way or another, and at a glance, Bai Zeman could see that there were at least 50 to 60 wounded. Even with Liang Peng and the rest here, it was impossible to stop more than 500 people completely. This only got worse when the survivors who were instigating the chaos realized that even if they were caught they would just be beaten and thrown aside. Considering they were going to die soon anyway, why not do whatever they wanted in the meantime? As he slowly approached the male student who had malicious intentions towards the female teacher, Bai Zeman couldn't help but remember his first meeting with Lilith 10 days ago. Back then, when she told him that she was a succubus, he immediately raised his guard against her even more than usual. After all, she was a demon. As the days progressed, Bai Zeman's guard against her gradually eased and he no longer viewed her with such wariness after hearing her explain to him how what the Bible quoted and humans knew was not exactly correct. However, that slight guard he had against her had almost been completely relieved just now. What was the first thing that came to everyone's mind when they heard the word demon? Those who were arrogant, greedy, envious, lust-filled, and angry, an embodiment of pure evil that would try to lure good souls to the side of darkness with their sweet words. But how about the word human, then? Those who were annoying, nasty, horrible, rude, arrogant, immoral, confusing, disdainful, violent, threatening, rule-breaking, harming, and hurting others out of greed. Weren't humans even worse than demons from that point of view? At least that was the answer Bai Zeman had reached for when his hand touched the male student's shoulder. Wait for me to finish and it will be your turn then. The male student grunted in annoyance, straining to remove his pants to begin his act. Sensing that the hand still remained firmly on his shoulder, the student turned around angrily and began cursing, "You bastard! I told you to wait until..." But his words caught in his throat when he finally recognized the face of the person standing in front of him. "You... Bai..." The student's teeth clicked against each other and his face went pale, unable to finish a single sentence properly. His face became even worse when he saw Shangguan Bingshui and Chen He standing unharmed a short distance away. Before the male student had a chance to try to say anything or utter another word, Bai Zeman's right hand shot forward and with a sharp squeeze his trachea was crushed and his head fell heavily to the side. Bai Zeman casually threw him to the ground without giving another glance, but if he looked at him again he could see the male student's eyes wide open before his death filled with horror. Swoosh! His body turned into a shadow and the next instant he appeared before a second student who was violently beating another fiercely. As in the previous case, the student's neck was completely broken and he fell forward. Before the student who was being beaten could clearly see what was happening, Bai Zeman had already disappeared. Swoosh! Crack! The sound of gusts of wind followed by the terrifying sounds of fragile bones being mercilessly crushed rang out several times but were suppressed by the screams of fear, cries of despair, and laughter of madness coming from the survivors. Gradually, however, more and more survivors began to notice that something was not right as people, one after another, fell to the ground with broken necks. What's going on? One burly student stopped in his tracks and looked around as he shouted in an attempt to shake off the fear he felt, "Come here if you're a man." Crack! The burly student's neck cracked and the man died pathetically without knowing what had happened even until the last second. Bai Zeman's agility had currently reached 126 points in total, which made him 12 times faster than a normal person. With such speed, his movements in a closed environment were limited but at the same time explosive. Therefore, in a matter of seconds, more than 30 people were slaughtered by his hands. The wild movements of the crazed survivors began to cease quickly as the more intelligent ones noticed that only those who caused chaos were dying. However, even after they stopped, the scythe of death came down harshly and firmly on their necks and claimed their lives without mercy. A minute later, all the survivors who were trying to assault female students or female teachers, all those who were physically attacking others or committing some kind of act considered vandalism had been slaughtered. Among them, 42 were male and 6 were female. The now less than 500 survivors looked apprehensively at the person standing amidst a pile of corpses whose expression was as nonchalant as if he had not killed nearly 100 people but as if he were ordering takeout at a restaurant before the apocalypse. Bai Zeman looked at both of his hands and was a little startled to realize that he felt nothing, he felt no sympathy or fear or pity for the people who lost their lives under his hands. This was the first time he had killed directly and it wasn't just one person. It was dozens at the same time. The right thing to do would be to at the very least, feel a touch of sorrow. Bai Zimin felt nothing but calm and even thought that what he did was the right thing to do. As to whether it was the right thing to do or not, everyone could have different opinions about it. C83, cowardly but obedient lambs. What did make Bai Zimin feel just, very slightly uncomfortable, was that even if he did not know these people before this and even had no idea that they were among the survivors, when he killed them he did not have the right to choose whether he wished to know them or not. The reason? It was because every time Bai Zimin broke a survivor's neck, the following messages appeared in green letters flashing in his retina. You have acquired the soul power of Chen Luokan level 0. You have acquired the soul power of Mei Xiao level 0. You have acquired the soul power of. You have acquired. Again and again, a small part of each person's soul power was absorbed by him and Bai Zimin was able to learn their names and some simple things like how old each one was. As for getting some kind of power from them, considering they were just normal survivors, Bai Zimin naturally didn't expect something like that. People often said that the eyes were the window to the soul and that a look said more than 1,000 words, he confirmed it at this moment. Raising his head, Bai Zimin saw that everyone was looking at him with different expressions, some were looking at him with fear, others with gratitude, shock, disbelief, and many other emotions or thoughts that were difficult to decipher. Who was the first person to cause all this mess? Amidst so much silence and uneasiness, his voice was the only thing that could be heard inside the subway with the occasional roar of some distant creature. Every time his gaze met that of a survivor, many of them did not dare to look directly at him and unconsciously looked at the corpses on the ground as if they wanted to remember that this person with an indifferent expression had just killed them. Bai Zimin also did not press the matter too much and nodded, I see. Since none of you want to talk, then I guess you don't need to eat anymore. His words seemed to have some effect as many people's faces changed slightly. This was especially so for the female students who had suffered almost a week locked up in the female dormitory. I don't think that among so many people present not even one of you can remember anything. Bai Zimin shook his head and waited patiently while looking towards no particular point. The place was silent for a few seconds and Chen He looked like he wanted to step forward to say something but Shang Guanbing Shui stopped him. He also looked at Wu Yujun for help but she just shook her head. With no other option, he had no choice but to remain silent. After almost a full minute of silence, a female student stepped forward, attracting everyone's attention. What is your name? Bai Zimin looked at her and smiled slightly, a smile that was somehow calm but also contrasting sharply with the current situation. Hesitantly, the female student spoke softly, My name is Nai Yu. Nai Yu? I see. Bai Zimin nodded and asked once more, Nai Yu, did you see something? You don't need to worry about any kind of consequences or much less. I assure you that if anyone dares to verbally assault you, give you unkind looks, or even try to touch a hair on your head after this, I will personally make sure that person or persons regret not letting themselves be eaten by zombies. Some people's expressions changed for the worse while the expression on Nai Yu's face eased noticeably. After a deep breath, she turned away from the crowd of people and began to point at some survivors while saying in a serious voice. I remember when Big Brother Bai and Big Sister Shang Guan went to help Big Brother Chen, these people started pushing and shouting. Some of them even beat up some people before mingling with the crowd. It's a lie. Big Brother Bai, that girl is a liar. You can't believe her. How could I beat up someone? Can't you see that I'm injured too? Among the more than 6 survivors who were pointed out by Nai Yu, some of them immediately turned pale and started shouting words of injustice. While it was true that Nai Yu might be lying, Bai Zimin's reasoning was simple, did she gain anything by lying? She had absolutely nothing to gain and on the contrary, she would be risking being marked by the other survivors, which would lead to Bai Zimin potentially killing her or expelling her from the group, which was basically the same as ending her life. Fu Suifeng, Cai Jing Ii, Zhong De, Kong Lan. Take them out and bring those ungrateful dogs here. Bai Zimin's voice thundered and his calm expression finally disappeared, being replaced by fury. Hearing the clearly angry tone of voice from him, the four named people did not dare to delay and using their superior stats and levels easily pulled the targeted people out of the group of survivors, dragging them out by force. Even the weakest of the four of them, Kong Lan, was at least 2 to 3 times stronger than a normal person, so any resistance or attempt to resist was futile. As the survivors were pulled out of the crowd, Shang Guanbing narrowed her eyes and took a step forward as she looked at an old acquaintance. Lin Xian. She stood a short distance away from Bai Zimin and looked at the past vice president of the student association with coldness. Lin Xian was a level 3 evolved person, so among the survivors, he was basically invincible. However, when he tried to resist, Cai Jingii easily reduced him thanks to her overwhelmingly superior agility. I didn't do anything. I really didn't do anything. Bing Shui, haven't you known me for several years? Don't you know what kind of person I am? At this moment Lin Xian had lost his past polite and glorious demeanor. He looked at Shang Guanbing and began to yell and beg with a pale face, clearly knowing that death was the only thing that awaited him. Seeing such behavior, Lilith could not help but chuckle. This Lin Xian had sacrificed a girl's life during the first day of the apocalypse to survive and had not even thought twice about it when he threw her before the blade of the fast mantis, yet now he looked like a fish jumping on a chopping board awaiting his inevitable fate. Bai Zimin looked at Shang Guanbing and announced indifferently, even if he is your friend he is not being spared from this. Since all these people still did not understand the cruelty of this world and the danger of the monsters running rampant outside was not enough, then he was going to show them all that if they did not behave in obedient lambs then only death awaited them. Since they wanted to be cowardly lambs, he was going to turn them all into cowardly but obedient lambs. Obedient to the point where his word was more valuable than God's decree. C84, killing, determination/regret. You don't need to say it. I'll take care of him myself. Shang Guanbing did not even look at Bai Zimin, but her words startled him noticeably. You will take care of him. Bai Zimin frowned and looked at her with a hint of mockery as he said coldly, what? Could it be that you have the courage and determination to end his life? The reason for his mocking tone stemmed from the fact that he did not believe she would dare to dictate the punishment he would sentence and carry out. From Bai Zimin's point of view, Shang Guanbing was just a spoiled little princess who threw tantrums by acting cold and untouchable. She turned her face and looked at him so coldly that her cold looks in the past seemed like child's play in comparison. You don't know anything about me. Bai Zimin couldn't help but his eyes widened slightly more than usual and under his incredulous gaze, she took a step forward. Her delicate white hand shimmered and the temperature began to plummet as a wave of frost formed around it before turning into a dagger of ice. Bing Shui. Chen He opened his eyes wide and muttered in shock. Wu Yujin's face also changed and her expression became complicated as she looked at her friend slowly moving forward. Still, she didn't seem to have any intention of stopping her. Unlike most people, due to her status, Wu Yujin had also seen many cruel things in the past and knew that even the previous society was just a jungle with rules, but after all, a jungle was a jungle no matter how much it was decorated. Hey! This must be a joke, isn't it? Bing Shui. Lin Xian bellowed and tried to back away in fright. However, under Bai Zimin's intense gaze, Zhongde kept him on his knees even if he was also scared of what was about to happen. During the past few days, Lin Xian's mental condition was becoming more and more unstable to the point that several times wild and crazy ideas appeared in his mind but he forcibly restrained them. However, when the slightest opportunity presented itself, he did not even hesitate for a second and took it gladly. Too bad, that was one of his biggest mistakes. Shang Guanbing stopped a step away and shook her head as she said coldly, we risk our lives, we scavenge for food, we rack our brains trying to think of the best way to keep you all safe. But what do we get in return? Nothing. Everything would be easier if we left you behind because honestly all of you are a heavy burden. However, instead of doing that, we support and feed you while keeping you safe. Her words were not just for Lin Xian to hear, they were for everyone present. The survivors who had done nothing wrong nodded and looked at the people who had been dragged out with anger-filled gazes. Many of them even couldn't help but raise their voices as they cursed them and complained. However, when Shang Guanbing Shui's voice sounded again, the rest of the voices were immediately silenced. We ask for nothing in return except that everyone behaves themselves. That you don't add more weight on our shoulders and that you don't make things more complicated than they already are. She looked at Lin Xian and her eyes flashed with a chill as she said, approximately 20 people died because of your selfish acts and you still want to live? Go to hell, you scum! Under the terrified look of Lin Xian, the shocked look of many survivors, and the disbelieving look of Chen He, Shang Guanbing Shui raised her slender arm and swiftly struck downward. The ice dagger was extremely sharp and easily penetrated the center of Lin Xian's skull, ending his life just like that. What was most remarkable was that even as his corpse slumped to the side, not even a drop of blood came out of the wound as the ice dagger had become a natural insulating layer, sealing everything tightly inside. The place fell into a stony silence and even Bai Zimin himself could not help but stare at Shang Guanbing Shui. After several seconds, he admitted, I guess you're right and I don't know anything about you. Daring to kill a person took some courage, but it was possible for anyone who set out to do so and even more so in this world where death was practically easier to obtain than a piece of bread. But the hard part was to keep calm after doing it. Shang Guanbing Shui's expression was cold and indifferent as always and her hand did not even quiver as she performed the act nor did she flinch at the end. Although she had just taken the life of a human being, it was as if it was nothing otherworldly to her. Obviously, she was also someone who had her own past and her own story to tell. Seeing that she said nothing, Bai Zimin simply shook his head before looking at Fu Suifeng. He asked in a deep voice, You dare to kill a person? Fu Suifeng's face changed greatly and a frightened expression shone in his eyes. He was brave enough to fight and kill enemies of other races. But killing humans whose sins were not worthy of death was hard for him to do. Bai Zimin also seemed to realize his answer without having to hear it from his mouth. He nodded and silently took out a strange-looking knife from his backpack as he said, This dagger is a rare-grade treasure, on the same level as my sword but slightly inferior. If you kill him this dagger is yours then. Agarth dagger, rare-grade treasure. A dagger focused to finish off the enemy at lightning speed. Can cut metal with ease. When equipped, it automatically increases agility by +12 and strength by +5. The dagger was the item that came out of the orange orb he obtained when defeating the First Order Shadow Tiger. Bai Zimin already had his Xianyuan sword and felt more comfortable wielding it compared to the Agarth dagger, therefore, instead of keeping it, he decided to give it to one of his direct subordinates, which in a way meant increasing his own power. Fu Suifeng's gaze lingered on the dagger. He knew that what Bai Zimin was doing was tempting him and it was indeed working. However, he took too long to decide and his chance was snatched away by someone else with greater determination. I'll do it. A female voice rang out. I dare to kill people. Bai Zimin looked at the pretty Cai Jingii, who had a slightly pale face but whose eyes glittered with determination, and nodded with a smile as he casually pointed at a survivor, Here. Take this dagger and kill him, it will be yours from then on. Cai Jingii took a deep breath and nodded, walking towards him and taking the dagger in her hands. The resolve in her eyes burned even more fervently as she saw the weapon's stats. She was determined to seize every opportunity to become stronger no matter how vicious it was. That was precisely why she was willing to take the risk of fighting and took Bai Zimin's hand at that time. Besides, Cai Jingii was a smart girl and knew that facing other human beings would only be a matter of time considering that within this group alone there were already so many problems. Her thinking was simple, since sooner or later I will have to kill if I want to survive in this world and still retain some dignity, then better sooner than later. If it was about courage, perhaps Cai Jingii was slightly inferior in comparison to Fu Suifeng. But if it was about determination to accomplish goals, she definitely surpassed him by far. Seeing the dagger in Cai Jing's hands, Fu Suifeng could not help but regret and quickly exclaimed, wait. I will do it. Too bad, his chance had already passed. Too late. Bai Zimin coldly refused and remarked, if you want to become stronger, you will have to take the chances I give you when I give them to you. Otherwise you'll have to manage on your own to get power. C85, Chen He's Shocking Discovery, Part 1. Was there really anyone who, even in their unconscious, did not wish to be stronger? In the past, human beings would try to acquire more money, and when they finally had that money, they would want more. When they had enough money to make their lives as luxurious and comfortable as possible, human beings would seek political power or military command. The human mind always wanted more and was never really satisfied even after achieving its past goals. This was even more so in this new world after the arrival of the soul record on Earth. In this new apocalyptic world, the possibilities of becoming stronger were literally everywhere. All one had to do was to pick up any weapon and go out into the streets to fight zombies or any other existence that would allow them to evolve regardless of whether they were weak or strong. However, while the possibilities of being stronger were everywhere, this rule also applied to the possibilities of dying. A person had to be mentally prepared for the fact that, at the moment of leaving, he or she might never come back. While everyone wanted to be stronger, while everyone wanted power, to receive respect, to eat the best food, and to enjoy the praise and longing gazes of beauties, very few were willing to take the risk involved in attaining such successes. Just now, Bai Zimin had given Fu Suifeng the opportunity to become far stronger, but he failed to appreciate it and missed out. Acquiring a weapon, especially a rare-grade treasure, was far more important than even having food or safe shelter, because with a weapon of such caliber, even a normal human being would acquire the power to fight zombies or other creatures, evolve, and acquire food or shelter with their own hands. Fu Suifeng was not willing to kill? Sure, Bai Zimin would not force him. But even if he knelt down and begged crying tears of regret, it was too late. Such opportunities were not easy to obtain, and since he chose his morality above all else, then he had to take responsibility for his own choices and consequences. Feeling Fu Suifeng's envious and regretful gaze upon her, Cai Jingii gritted her teeth and raised the dagger with trembling hands. Wait. I beg you not to kill me. The student's eyes were wide open and the terror in his face was so great that he seemed on the verge of going mad. But how could he not be terrified? This was about death. His death. Just imagine what would have happened if you didn't have strength. Bai Zimin's voice sounded behind her, encouraging her and giving her bravery. If your luck was bad, maybe you would be dead. If your luck was, shall we say, good? You might have been abused by scum like him. Hearing his words, Cai Jingii bit her lip and stopped hesitating. Under the terrified gaze of the student and the shocked look of the others, her arm waved at a speed difficult for normal people to follow. The young student felt pain in his chest, and as he looked down he saw blood begin to ooze from a small puncture, right into his heart. He looked up and momentarily met the eyes of his killer before the light in his gaze faded and his lifeless body collapsed on the ground. Cai Jingi's face lost all color and she brought a hand to her mouth as she looked at the red blood staining the ground. She took several unsteady steps backward, but two firm arms clung to her and kept her from falling to the ground. Good job! Now you have not only avenged those who died for his act of selfishness but also gained strength. Isn't that good? Bai Zimin praised and encouraged her. Why yes. That's true. Cai Jingii could barely speak and nodded. While it was true that Bai Zimin's words were laced with all sorts of manipulations, the reality was that she was willing to hold on to them at this moment. After calming his subordinate and under the watchful eyes of everyone, Bai Zimin took out another item from his backpack. The object was a pair of gloves with pointed knuckles that seemed to be able to break a rock with their hardness. This pair of gloves was actually the second item he obtained from the Shadow Tiger's final orb. Obviously, Bai Zimin was out of luck since he possessed better gloves. Power gloves, normal grade treasure able to break through the defenses of any enemy below level 15. When equipped, it automatically increases strength by +3. Zhongde, do you want them? Bai Zimin waved the gloves and asked as he looked at the big man. While the gloves were not so good, the amount of stat points was equivalent to almost 2 levels. 2 initial levels might not seem much, but after level 15 leveling up was not so easy and required quite a lot of effort. Therefore, 3 stat points were really good from that point of view. After a second of hesitation and seeing Cai Jing stroking her new weapon now more calmly than before, Zhongde nodded and took a step forward. He said nothing and directly punched on the chest of another survivor who had incited the chaos, destroying his heart into pieces directly along with several bones. The male student spat blood and with eyes filled with disbelief collapsed lifelessly just like his previous companion. Unlike Cai Jing, his face turned pale but his reaction was much calmer. He picked up the gloves and equipped them before falling silent again. Seeing that he was a man of few words, Bai Zimin chuckled and praised, "Well done, Zhongde. Kong Lan, the next opportunity that comes your way will be for you as long as it is something that suits your style of evolution." He did not forget about his last subordinate and the only healer in the group. Kong Lan took a deep breath and nodded firmly. She felt a little jealous that she didn't have the opportunity to acquire a treasure, but at the same time she was relieved that she didn't have to kill a person. Such conflicting feelings caused her to unconsciously feel a little relieved to have more time to adjust to all the sudden change. After the death of 2 more survivors, the other 4 who had caused trouble were naturally terrified. However, before they could utter a single word, a shadow appeared before them and crushed their necks in a second, ending their lives without hesitation and without unnecessary explanation. After finishing off the main source of the problem, Bai Zimin looked at the survivors and this time he did not care in any way about the looks he was receiving. "All of you, let me say this for the first and only time to you." His voice as cold as his eyes echoed in the subway, "From this damned second on, if any of you dare to cause the slightest trouble or disobey, you will be whipped until you feel your flesh fall off your bodies. Don't you want to work? Don't you want to help? Sure. Then stay obediently in the corner and don't stand in my way. If any of you dare to obstruct me even once, depending on the level of trouble caused, I will personally take it upon myself to end your dogs' lives." The face of everyone present turned pale and they all nodded repeatedly. Although none of them had particularly done anything wrong, they were secretly reminding each other over and over again to be careful not to break any of the rules laid down as the consequences were too serious to bear. Seeing everyone nodding obediently, Bai Zimin casually concluded, "If any of you are dissatisfied then you can get the hell out of here right now. Neither I nor anyone else will stop you." Some people seemed hesitant to hear his final words. Especially some hot-blooded male students who were not willing to be treated like dogs. However, the hot blood of these people cooled down as they remembered the danger outside and obediently swallowed all their disaffection. Seeing no one saying anything and no one standing out to leave, Bai Zimin coldly sneered before looking at Chen He and the rest. C86, Chen He's Shocking Discovery, Part 2 last. After the previous matter settled down, the survivors moved the bodies to a corner by direct orders from Bai Zimin himself. Even those who were disgusted or afraid of blood as well as scared of seeing the lifeless bodies were forced to work this time. Because everyone knew that the mood of this new god of death was not good at this very moment, they all obediently swallowed their complaints and dragged the bodies deep into the subway parking lot in groups to avoid attracting other creatures. Bai Zimin looked at the corpses with some regret. Actually, he wanted to use one of those guys as a test specimen to experiment with the mutated plant to make sure it was a real treasure and not a time bomb. However, in the end, he decided not to do it. The reason was simple, he did not want Shangguan Bingshui and the others to know about the existence of the plant, at least not yet. If he took the plant out at that time the secret would be revealed, and if he dragged one of the subjects away it would be suspicious. Therefore, his hands were temporarily tied as far as this matter was concerned. "So, can you explain what happened?" I hope you have a good reason for having gone out alone or otherwise. After walking far enough away from the other survivors without any combat capability, Bai Zimin looked at Chen He and narrowed his eyes. All the chaos before, from a certain point of view, was closely related to Chen He. Therefore, if he could not give a good explanation now, it was highly probable that Bai Zimin would not be able to restrain himself and would end up, at the very least, beating him for being irresponsible. Chen He wanted to talk to Shangguan Bingshui about what had just happened, but he could also feel strong pressure coming from Bai Zimin's body, so he wisely decided to leave the matter for another time. He took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in his life, small. Small as if he was a little puppy being observed by a hungry and wild lion. The reason I went out was to explore the road. Although during the past few days we tried to clear most of the surrounding strong creatures, if one sneaked into the perimeter, casualties could happen and the chaos could become fatal. Chen He explained carefully. After a moment of silence, Bai Zimin relaxed slightly and nodded. If that was the motive, then it made perfect sense. After all, a zombie did not represent a danger, but a mutated cat or dog did represent extreme danger due to its fast movement speed. If even one of those creatures managed to sneak in among the survivors, even Bai Zimin himself would have a hard time preventing human deaths. No matter how strong he was, at the end of the day he was only one person and could not take care of nearly 500 people. Even with the addition of the other evolved ones in the group, it would be an incredibly arduous if not impossible task. So? How do I end an exploration trip in a 4-meter-tall ape beating you up? Bai Zimin asked casually. Chen He blushed slightly and couldn't help but reply, "It didn't beat me up, it didn't even touch me." Whatever. Bai Zimin waved his hand and rolled his eyes. The giant ape didn't beat you up, but it sure made you run all over the place like a chicken in a barnyard. He thought secretly. Anyway. Chen He coughed and secretly looked at Shangguan Bingshui before continuing. His expression turned extremely serious and there was even a tinge of fear in his eyes as he said, "At first, there was no problem. Just some normal zombies that were stuck inside some buildings and the like. However, after approximately 2 hours passed and just as I was approaching the exit, I noticed that the atmosphere was starting to change." The atmosphere was starting to change. Shangguan Bingshui remarked uncertainly and looked at her childhood friend strangely. Bai Zimin also frowned and for a moment thought that perhaps Chen He's head really had been hit by the giant ape after all. However, he soon realized that this was not the case. Chen He's expression was terribly serious as he said firmly, not only had the mood suddenly become much heavier, but even the surroundings were no longer the same. The buildings from before were surrounded by tall grass to the point of almost reaching my knees. The trees seemed to have grown at least 2 or 3 times the normal size. The more they listened, the more Bai Zimin and the rest were surprised. Everything Chen He was mentioned seemed to be something out of a fantasy or science fiction movie, and if it were in the past anyone would treat it as a joke. However, what was not possible in this world? Each person even had a status window where they could see their personal stats and even become monstrously powerful by defeating other existences and learning magical skills. Talking about common sense in this new world wasn't necessarily a smart thing to do. Besides, I think I might have found the source from which all those damn bugs and weird mutated monsters come from. Chen He concluded and in the end couldn't help but curse under his breath. Bai Zimin's face finally changed and he took a step forward as he hurriedly urged, "What did you see?" Bai Zimin had always felt that something was wrong with this place. Ever since the appearance of the blazing beetle, he had realized that first-order creatures were not existences that mankind could casually face. To defeat monsters such as those possessing strange skills, probably only a properly armed army could defeat them. However, in this place alone, Bai Zimin and his group had already faced 4 such existences, 5 if one counted the fast mantis that was in the process of evolving. If the university alone was already like this, then wouldn't the outside world be in an even worse catastrophic situation? But from Chen He's words, the situation seemed to have an explanation and a logical reason. Out of curiosity and to get some information, I went a little deeper into the forest. Chen He explained slowly, narrating the events that happened a few hours ago. At first I was surprised that there was no danger at all. But when I got to what I think must be the center of the place, I saw a large number of terrifying monsters next to a strange creature that appeared to be a silkworm. I think that silkworm is the main problem here since they all seem to be protecting it. Terrifying monsters? A silkworm-like creature? Bai Zimin looked at each other and noticed the same confusion as well as shock and fear. Chen He. Those terrifying monsters you speak of, could it be that they are? Shang Guanbing Shui looked worried about something and didn't even finish her question properly. Still, everyone understood what she meant. They are. To the horror of most, Chen He nodded firmly and slowly said, just from the aura alone, they are definitely first order. All of them. C87, moving towards the exit. Bai Zimin, Shang Guanbing Shui, and Liang Peng's faces turned extremely ugly upon hearing Chen He's words. Shang Guanbing Shui and Liang Peng had experienced the power of a first-order creature firsthand, so they knew how terrifying those beasts were. While it was true that both of them had since become far stronger after absorbing the soul power of the anti-magic zombie and other creatures, the fear still lingered. Although Chen He had not said how many first-order creatures there were in that strange forest he mentioned having found in the middle of the university, only 3 or 4 of those monsters were enough to cause problems for the current group. As for if there were more than that amount and they attacked all together, then it would be difficult to survive. Even Bai Zimin himself had no confidence in facing many first-order existences unless he himself completed his own evolution. If it was 2 or maybe 3 at the same time, then he could somehow manage if he put his life on the line during combat. However, more than that number was beyond his ability, which made him feel helpless. It's still not enough. I really am still too weak. If only I could kill several tens or several hundreds at the same time, how good would it be? Bai Zimin secretly sighed. If Lilith knew his thoughts, she might die due to anger. He was already the biggest anomaly she had ever seen in her entire life or heard of since the appearance of the first intelligent being, but he still seemed to be unsatisfied. How many of those creatures did you see? Even if you don't know the exact number, you should have a rough idea, shouldn't you? Bai Zimin asked after a moment's consideration. While knowing the truth could sometimes become demoralizing, if a person sank into fantasies of lies, then it was only a matter of time before they died in this world. To survive, Bai Zimin understood that not only strength was needed but also to be realistic and accept things as they were no matter how difficult they were. Otherwise anyone could end up being devoured not by an enemy but by oneself. Chen He took a deep breath and looked at everyone present before saying with a tinge of fear in his voice, at the very least, there should be about 7 creatures of the first order. As for the maximum number, my estimate is around a dozen. 7 minimum and a dozen maximum. Liang Peng muttered in disbelief, remembering the speed and combat prowess of the anti-magic zombie that nearly cut him in 2. Everyone held their breath and looks of despair flashed in the eyes of some of them. Although Fu Suifeng and the rest had no idea how strong a first-order creature really was, they could remember the oppressive feeling coming from the dead body of the giant beetle and the blue-skinned mutated zombie. Besides, it didn't take a genius, as the expressions on the faces of those who had faced such beings said enough to make words unnecessary. After several seconds of uncomfortable silence and under an oppressive atmosphere, Bai Zimin's voice called out. It seems we need to prepare a few things before we leave if we want to get the other survivors out of this place. Otherwise, the chances of even one of them surviving will be practically 0%. If Bai Zimin wanted to leave alone, then he was confident that except for agility-based first-order creatures like the shadow tiger, no other creature or existence could really stop their footsteps unless one of them had a strange skill. However, if he wanted to go off on his own, he would have tried it long ago instead of staying here trying to raise a power by himself. Shang Guanbing Shui also calmed down after a deep breath that accentuated her perfect body even more. She nodded and spoke calmly, "That's right. It looks like we need to adjust a few things. Even without Bai Zimin saying anything, she had already understood a few things and various ideas were constantly forming in her mind. After a brief discussion, the group called the survivors together again and a group of them began to set to work on the task assigned by Bai Zimin. While the survivors were doing their part, Bai Zimin met with Shangguan Bingshui, Chen He, Liang Peng, and the rest to discuss some final outlines of the plan. If the plan succeeded, then they could probably retreat without casualties, but if the plan failed, then it would be difficult for the vast majority of them to survive. Because Bai Zimin and the rest were somewhat tired after working all day modifying the 10 buses, and because the sun had already begun to descend on the horizon, they all went to sleep after dinner. With the start of day number 11 since the arrival of the soul record on Earth, the 10 buses were fully loaded. The end seats were removed and the freezers were filled with meat and all kinds of perishable food. On top of the freezers were placed the bags of food, and the survivors, who now numbered just over 400 after the previous day's massacre, were able to settle in with ease and comfort. One of the buses carried only 3 things: the corpse of the shadow tiger, the headless body of the platinum ape, and the body of the fast mantis. Although it was somewhat problematic to carry the silver ape's body inside, on top it was easy, and with Liang Peng and Zhongde working together they managed to lift the beast's body without any problems. In fact, there was even enough space left over to carry all the clothes they had obtained from the male and female dormitory earlier, as well as other types of utilities. Unlike the female dormitory, which had several survivors thanks to the strange behavior of the first-order anti-magic zombie, the students who had barricaded themselves in the male dormitory had not been so lucky. 2 days ago, when Bai Zimin and the rest arrived at the male dormitory, the doors had been broken down and the survivors inside had already turned into zombies or had simply been eaten by other zombies or some other creature. The buses were started by their respective drivers and slowly and orderly began to move. The engines roared in sync, attracting the attention of the distant zombies who with overwhelmingly slow speeds began to stagger toward the scene. The small convoy of 10 vehicles circled the main street on the north side of the university that connected to the south side and the only exit from the facility that allowed buses to pass. Although the road had already been cleared once for the most part, it was impossible to wipe out all the zombies considering their numbers unless one was willing to spend several days searching and hunting. Therefore, occasionally a few zombies would appear in the middle of the road. However, the drivers, who were normal survivors, did not bother with them and simply continued to push on without altering the course in the slightest. Bang! 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 The buses, which had been modified and reinforced using the first-order blazing beetle shell, viciously hit the zombies and sent them flying several meters. Some zombies had their skulls directly crushed by the heavy collision, while some luckier ones got back on their feet with some ignored bone fractures or simply crawled on their hands after losing mobility in their lower bodies. XIETIAN, Mutated Forest. It really changed everything. Shangguan Bingshui couldn't help but let her eyes widen in shock. This is nothing. Just wait until you get more to the center and you'll see the difference. Chen He, who had sat beside her, remarked with a serious expression. Even though he had expected it after listening to Chen He explaining the situation the day before, Bai Zimin could not help his face from changing slightly as he scanned the surroundings while the bus he was riding on slowly moved forward. The familiar buildings, built with the best materials available and whose plans were designed by the best architects in the country, were now cracked while some suspicious-looking tangles surrounded the walls. Some areas of the road had been cracked by long roots of trees or other extremely strange plants growing everywhere, forcing the drivers of the vehicles to slow down their speed even more. But the most striking thing was that even from a considerable distance, Bai Zimin and the rest could already see the tops of several trees that had previously been only a few meters high, now silently rising up several tens of meters as if they wanted everyone to see them, announcing their growth. The faces of the survivors changed and their expressions varied. But for the most part, they were all surprised and scared at the same time as they huddled together and began to whisper softly. Although they were frightened at the strange and unfamiliar sight, no survivor present dared to make too much noise. This was so not only for fear of the unknown dangers that might lurk nearby but also because Bai Zemin's exhibition of cruelty and decisiveness in the killing had been deeply engraved in the minds of all of them. Those with malicious intentions or ulterior motives had basically been slaughtered yesterday, and those who still had some kind of wild thoughts did not have the courage to do anything for fear of having their necks destroyed without warning. Therefore, although the atmosphere was oppressive, no one made too much noise apart from the inevitable, and everything went quite smoothly. Shang Guanbing Shuet, being the observant woman that she was, also noticed the change inside the bus she was riding. She could not help but look out the front window at the bus in front of her with complex eyes. Obviously, the actions initiated yesterday by Bai Zemin were showing immediate results. The buses stopped next to the back of a 6- or 7-story building that was formerly used as the main library, and the survivors began to deboard in an organized manner under the watchful eyes of the 8 fighters of the group. Bai Zemin along with Chen He went into the building and made a quick job eliminating the zombies from the first 3 floors of the building to let the survivors enter. This would only take them 10 to 20 minutes, as the library was not usually a crowded place, less so on days when the internet had everything that was needed. While the 2 of them were in charge of the temporary shelter in which the survivors would stay when the stronger ones went deeper into the mutant forest to try to open an exit to the outside world, Shang Guanbing Shuet, Liang Peng, Cai Jing, who were currently the 3 strongest of the group, stayed behind to protect approximately 300 survivors. As for the remaining few more than 100, they were currently carrying out a different task under the guidance of Fu Suifeng and Zhongde. In front of the group of survivors who were walking densely packed together to lessen the possibilities of death or infection in case a mutated creature or zombie appeared, Fu Suifeng and Zhongde were advancing silently while cautiously observing the surroundings. Because they were both men of few words, regardless of their motives, and due to the danger of the environment, neither of them tried to initiate a conversation and simply walked in silence. After walking for about 5 minutes, Zhongde stopped and while observing the surroundings noted, "I think this place should be fine." Fu Suifeng also stopped, and the survivors walking a few steps behind immediately stopped as well. He carefully observed the surroundings and noticed that the green grass that was neatly clipped in the past was now so tall that it passed his knees. "All right." Fu Suifeng nodded, still feeling a little depressed about missing the opportunity that Bai Zemin presented to him yesterday. Zhongde looked at him and tapped him on the shoulder as he said with a rare smile, "Why the long face? Has Big Brother Bai treated us unkindly? From the time we started following him, he not just gave us the best food, but also gave us the right to express our ideas, opinions, and even continues to give us the opportunity to become stronger by giving us valuable treasures. I believe that as long as we follow him honestly we can have a better future, and the opportunities to become stronger will come naturally." Fu Suifeng was surprised, as this was the first time he heard Zhongde speak so many words at the same time. However, his companion's words lightened his pessimistic mood and he nodded firmly, "You are right. We just have to follow in his footsteps and he will lead the way as he has always done so far." Zhongde nodded silently and raised a thumbs up at him. Neither of them was dumb, or else they wouldn't have been able to get into a university as prestigious as this one. Moreover, their adaptability was also higher than that of normal survivors, allowing them to notice things that others might overlook. Therefore, both Fu Suifeng and Zhongde knew that as long as Bai Zemin did not die suddenly, he was destined to achieve great feats in this new world. Currently, Fu Suifeng was level 15 and Zhongde level 13, however, even at this point, they could not even see Bai Zemin's back. They both knew that with their current stats even facing a few dozen people was no challenge at all, yet neither of them could even comprehend Bai Zemin's strength. They both knew that the world had changed and society would never be the same again, even if humans regained control of the world things could not go back to the way they were. New powers would arise, and with the possibility of evolving, the government, military forces, everything would be restructured. The world was far, infinitely more dangerous than in the past, however, opportunities came hand in hand with danger. Zhongde and Fu Suifeng had decided to change their destinies and, in case they were still alive, those of their families as well. How? betting everything on Bai Zimin. Since he had managed to rise to such an extent so quickly and was even able to terminate first-order existences so easily, Bai Zimin's future would be resplendent, and as part of the initial group of his followers, Zhongde and Fu Suifeng, as well as their loved ones, would naturally be able to take a small part of that resplendence. C89, The True Terror of the Mutated Forest, Part 1. Shall we begin? Fu Suifeng looked at Zhongde and asked with a somewhat excited smile. The corner of Zhongde's mouth twitched a couple of times, but he still nodded. Let's begin. Fu Suifeng turned around and, looking at the survivors, tried to speak in an authoritative tone. Start spreading the oil and gasoline on the nearby plants and grass. Remember not to go too deep and only focus on the outer perimeter. Little by little, that young man with little self-confidence was beginning to acquire some attitude. Thanks to the wonderful opportunity provided by Bai Zimin back then, Fu Suifeng was gradually becoming a person worthy of leadership. This was a great contrast if compared to his past self, who was shy and reserved to the level that even having a normal conversation was difficult for him. The survivors nodded and began to move with careful steps. These 100 were mostly men, and there were only a few women among them. Each had been carefully chosen the day before, and all were brave enough to face danger indirectly. Fighting was still out of the question, but if it was a matter of taking a little risk without having to face any mutated creatures, they were still okay. That was precisely why these 100 or so survivors dared to come to this dangerous place. Each survivor carried a 2-liter bottle, and a few of them carried 5-liter jerry cans filled to the brim. The bottles contained oil and the jerry cans contained gasoline that had been extracted from the cars parked in the subway parking lot the day before. Although it was a shame to have to waste a resource like fuel, everyone knew that the plan devised by the group's leaders was the best option to wipe everything out. The survivors moved carefully and started pouring the oil and gasoline everywhere, some fallen tree trunks or branches, dry or dead leaves, on the grass, on some bushes, basically everything in the outer perimeter of the area where the survivors were had been sprayed with flammable substance. Right. Step number 1 was to set the forest on fire. Although it was not possible to go any deeper since the survivors would be slaughtered without even knowing how they died, after listening to Chen He's explanation, some realized that the reason why the first-order creatures did not come out of the forest was probably to protect that strange silkworm-like monster. In fact, the only reason why the platinum ape had been so furious the day before and had left the forest and even ignored Shangguan Bing Shui, focusing its attention solely on Chen He, was because the beast was sleeping when he secretly tried to kill it with an arrow imbued with magic into its chest a short distance from its heart. Otherwise it was unlikely that the platinum ape would leave the center of the forest. As for the rest of the first-order creatures leaving the forest, Bai Zimin and the rest couldn't be sure, but it was probably because they were on the outer perimeter rather than the center. Done. Fu Suifeng exclaimed quietly as he gestured for the survivors to return. Let's report back. Zhongde looked at the mutated forest one last time before turning around and starting to walk back the way they had come. At the top of a 5-story building directly across from where the group of 100 survivors had sprayed the oil and gasoline, Bai Zimin stood silently as he gazed at the mutated forest stretching as far as the eye could see. The gentle breeze of wind that caressed his face carried the strong smell of fuel that was intoxicating, but in a way also had a touch of attraction in it, constantly reminding him of what he should do next. Beside him, Lilith was sitting up in the mid-air with one leg crossed over the knee of the other and lazily resting her face on one hand. However, though she looked casual, if one paid special attention to her striking red eyes, one could easily notice the glint of excitement and exhilaration that was constantly flickering like a naughty child. So, will you do it now? Lilith asked curiously. Bai Zimin nodded without averting his gaze and said slowly, currently I did everything I could do. I improved my control over mana, I also learned to get a better control over the amount of magic I can use, and I even trained for more than 15 hours every day practically without a break for 3 whole days with my blood manipulation. He paused and closed his eyes, trying to feel the mana around him as he said in a low voice, I even devised an unstoppable attack. My strongest attack at this point. If I can't kill a first-order existence with my bare hands after all this, then I might as well start thinking that such a task really is impossible to accomplish and this unknown entity called soul record is insane. Well, I'm sure you'll be able to do it. Lilith rolled a lock of her dark hair on her index finger and said with a smile, your growth so far has been the most terrifying but at the same time wonderful I have ever seen. If you can't make it, then no one can. Bai Zimin chuckled and did not comment on it. In fact, even if Lilith did not say those words, he was 99.9% confident that his attack would definitely succeed in claiming the life of his enemy. As for the remaining 0.1%, that was reserved for contingencies beyond what the current him could handle. Soon after, Bai Zimin slowly opened his eyes and looked down the building. There, Shang Guanbing Shui was coming out from inside the facility along with Chen He and Liang Peng. They seemed to be discussing the second phase of the plan. As if sensing his gaze, Shang Guanbing Shui stopped the conversation and looked up. Her indifferent sky-colored eyes met a pair of dark and cold eyes like a winter night. Without saying anything, Shang Guanbing Shui started walking towards the mutated forest. On the other hand, Chen He jumped a couple of times and climbed onto a building next to Bai Zimin's before aiming his preloaded crossbow towards the forest. As for the burly Liang Peng, he held tightly to his big hammer and planted both feet firmly on the ground as he narrowed his eyes towards the unfamiliar but danger-ridden forest. Before Shang Guanbing Shui got too far away, Bai Zimin shouted loudly, "Hey, Shang Guanbing Shui!" She stopped and half-turned around to look at him just in time to see him throw something at her. With a nimble and easy movement, the object he threw was caught by her. After seeing what it was, her small mouth opened slightly and her indifferent eyes for the first time in a long time had a wavelength of emotions that even she herself couldn't comprehend. "I'll lend it to you. When you come back you give it back to me." Bai Zimin's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. In the end, she looked back toward the top of the building and said the first word that came to her mind, "Thank you." Bai Zimin nodded and smiled casually as he said, "I'm relying on you." C90, The True Terror of the Mutated Forest, Part 2 Last. Chen He and Liang Peng observed the strange interaction between Bai Zimin and Shang Guanbing Shui but had no idea what was going on or why she had thanked him. However, due to the fact that they were on high alert for what was about to happen, neither of them dared to even look away from the mutated forest. After saying words of thanks for the first time in so long that even she could not remember when it had been the last time, Shang Guanbing Shui put away the object that Bai Zimin had given her carefully and marched into the mutated forest alone. Bai Zimin looked at her thin, small back that seemed as fragile as a glass window slowly disappearing from his sight. Then, he knelt down on his left knee and took out 2 bottles of blazing beetle's blood from his backpack. He carefully scattered the blood in front of him until a bright red pool formed and then closed his eyes. Although he looked calm on the outside, his mind was working overtime imagining a spear as he began to move the mana inside his body, this time without worrying about saving. At the same time as his mana began to be consumed at astonishing speeds, Bai Zimin began to use his magic to control as much magical power as possible while the image of the best possible spear shone in his mind. The tip had to be sharp to be able to pierce through any defense and destroy any impediment. The sheath to be sturdy enough to not be easily destroyed by the enemy, to be easy to hold for throwing but difficult to withdraw. Every line of the weapon flickered in his mind as Bai Zimin imagined himself wielding a hammer and pounding metal on an anvil using fire at high temperatures. Even without the tools, with magic and mana, he could create objects by adding his blood manipulation. While it wasn't the same, creation was still creation. The blood on the ground glowed crimson and slowly a spear with 3 blades began to take shape, the blood solidified, strange lines similar to engravings began to appear on the pulley and an end in a shape similar to a poker card trefoil. What Bai Zimin was creating was not a normal spear, it was specifically a trident. His face began to pale and beads of sweat began to form on his forehead as his 273 mana points ran wildly outward. American Samoa if a water dam had broken. If Bai Zimin's plan was successful then there was no need to hold anything back as he would be rewarded with far more. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Meanwhile, Shang Guanbing Shui advanced through the mutated forest, moving deeper and deeper, closer and closer to the center of the place. The first thing she noticed was the purity of the air around her. The air was so pure that she could feel as if her lungs were being purified of all the polluted air she had breathed throughout her life. However, she soon realized that what she was breathing was not exactly the same air she had known since birth. Mana. Such a thought flashed in her mind as she kept running deeper. The air was charged with mana, and the closer she got to the center, the denser the amount of mana became. If the air outside this place, the air breathed by humans, was a composition of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, neon, helium, and others, then the air Shang Guanbing Shui was breathing in right now also contained mana as its main component. Due to her agile speed, Shang Guanbing Shui was not paying attention to the beauty of the place, or she would be surprised to notice how harmonious everything around her looked. A few butterflies the size of basins flapped their wings gently, while bees the size of adult human fists rested comfortably on flowers that reached almost a meter in height. There were even a few dogs sleeping peacefully with a few mutated cats beside them. They all seemed to have made a tactical agreement not to fight and instead were concentrating on absorbing as much mana as possible even while they slept. About a minute later, Shang Guanbing Shui could not help but stagger slightly, and her face changed completely as she realized that her blood began to slowly boil as if a volcano was about to erupt, and she felt like vomiting due to the sudden discomfort. The feeling was similar to the one she felt during the first day of the apocalypse just seconds before that strange message flashed in the retina of her eyes, signaling the beginning of a new era. Humans were different from animals, bugs, or plants. Humans could not just casually absorb the mana of the surroundings at will, and that was precisely the reason why everyone had a small part of the world's mana within their soul. If that amount went beyond what was bearable by the user's soul, zombie-like mutations would begin to appear as the body would try to adapt to the change as best and as quickly as possible to avoid total death. That was what she was experiencing at the moment. She stopped breathing hurriedly to substantially slow down mana's absorption and pushed her speed to the limit. Although Shang Guanbing Shui was more focused on the path of magic, her melee prowess was by no means deficient. Even before the appearance of the soul record on Earth, she was already a genius when it came to martial arts, and thus she possessed the unranked passive skill level 3 combat expert. Moreover, every time she leveled up, she added both points to agility. As for the reason, perhaps only she knew exactly. The reality was that she had currently reached level 24 the day before after acquiring a large amount of soul power from the Platinum Ape, and was currently close to being able to start her first real evolution. Therefore, 48 agility points came from leveling up alone, currently reaching 109 points in total thanks to collaborating in the defeat and slaughter of 2 first-order existences, as well as her normal grade treasure boots. While she could not compare to Bai Ziman, who had almost 130 agility points even though he still had 32 status points reserved and a lot of soul power to be absorbed due to being stuck at level 25, her agility was outstanding compared to most. A few seconds later, she finally arrived at what seemed to be the center of the place, and even with her calmness she couldn't help but be terrified at the sight. At that time, Chen He probably hadn't had time to look at the situation around him cautiously, or else he wouldn't have said that there should be at most a dozen first-order creatures. Just by looking around a couple of times, Shang Guanbing Shui had already counted more than 20. After absorbing the soul power of the Platinum Ape, Shang Guanbing Shui had received a huge boost in her stats. Precisely because of that, she was confident in fighting one-on-one and killing a first-order creature below level 45, however, if they all joined forces to attack her and managed to surround her, then she wouldn't even be able to resist for a second before being killed. C91, Blood Berserker, First Order by Zeman and New Skill. Part 1. Shang Guanbing Shui quickly hid behind a giant tree beside her and crouched down as she carefully observed the scene before her eyes in wonder. In the center of what appeared to be a clear patch of grass was a small lake of crystal clear water, a lake that if she remembered correctly was only a small island where there was a small rose and tulip garden. Next to the lake, there were at least 30 or 40 beasts of all kinds. Some of them had several legs, some others were standing on 2 legs, and others were just casually crawling on the ground. Strange-looking snakes whose bodies stretched almost 15 meters, giant elephant beetles, fat bees measuring more than 30 centimeters, dogs, cats, all kinds of creatures were there without a fight. Even though they occasionally looked at each other with fighting desire and eyes filled with murderous intent, none of them took the first bite. Therefore, the place was in peaceful silence where the sound of an occasional growl or the rippling water of the lake was the only thing that could be heard, along with the wind blowing through the treetops. Suddenly, a strange creature that was surrounded by several other first-order creatures slowly crawled from its position to the shore of the lake. The other first-order creatures began to move carefully, allowing the strange creature to pass, but everyone's eyes remained fixed on the beast as if they were its guardians or its captors and feared it would slip out of their sight. Shang Guanbing Shui could not help but feel a surge of disgust when she finally caught a glimpse of the appearance of the creature which Chen He had described the day before. The creature was actually a huge worm. Its more than 3-meter-long body left a trail of disgusting-looking sticky liquid every time it crawled everywhere. Its stomach moved strangely as if there were millions of living objects moving inside it. For a moment Shang Guanbing Shui had thought that perhaps the huge worm was pregnant and perhaps about to give birth. However, she soon realized that this was not the case. The giant worm was extremely slow, so even though it was relatively close to the shore, it still took a couple of seconds for it to reach the water to start drinking. After a few gulps, the giant worm suddenly stopped its movements and its mouth opened wide, revealing a terrifying-looking set of teeth inside. Howl! The creature let out a high-pitched howl that caused ripples and raised some waves in the previously calm lake. The previously calm forest suddenly became agitated and Shang Guanbing Shui thought she had been discovered. However, soon everything calmed down again, and what happened next was something she could never forget. The giant worm's puffed-up stomach began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye as a thick cloud of sapphire-colored air came out of the creature's mouth. The sapphire-colored air soon spread to the surrounding area and began to blend in with the forest. The trees began to become more alive, the plants began to grow slowly, and the animals and insects began to suck in deeply. Mana! Shang Guanbing Shui's eyes lit up and she finally understood everything, solving the mystery that none of them could solve before. Why were there so many first-order creatures in this place? How was it possible that the small front garden of the university suddenly turned into a forest that looked like something out of a prehistoric movie? Why weren't all these monsters fighting each other to evolve? It was all caused by that giant worm. Apparently, the giant worm had the ability to create and produce mana inside its body to evolve. However, the amount was so much that it had no choice but to release much of it or else it would die. The other beasts simply took advantage of the situation and began to slowly grow. Shang Guanbing Shui suddenly felt a bad premonition and hurriedly turned around. Her expression froze as she saw what seemed to be hundreds of tiny leeches crawling towards her and slowly surrounding her. If she fought the leeches naturally she could kill them all easily. However, if she fought here she would attract the attention of the other creatures and that wasn't exactly part of the plan. I have no choice. She gritted her teeth and shot out of her hiding place. Her speed burst into full gear, making wonderful use of all her agility, and in no time she had almost completely closed the distance between her and the lake. However, the first-order creatures noticed her and began to move while roaring ferociously. The synchronized roars of dozens of first-order existences were so terrifying that even an unnatural sound wave shot out towards her. Because Shang Guanbing Shui was focused on reaching her target, she could not afford to stop to defend herself or avoid the attack, because if she did that she knew that the entire previously devised plan would fail. Therefore, she could only continue to move forward independently. Ugh! Her face turned slightly pale and her steps faltered for a moment, giving her a frail and pitiful appearance. However, she endured the dizziness she felt and bit her lips fiercely. Her cold eyes had a look of resolve and she continued to charge forward. Swoosh! Suddenly the wind seemed to be cut in two by an object moving at high speed and Shang Guanbing Shui felt a horrifying pressure from her back. However, she ignored that attack and continued forward without stopping. What was behind her was a snake that was almost 20 meters long and was currently swinging its heavy tail at her. If she was hit directly by that attack, even if she survived, it was unlikely that she would be able to get up for quite a while. However, just as she was about to be whipped, a small ragged-looking bronze bell came out of the pocket of her combat robe and floated above her head, releasing a yellow glow that soon surrounded her completely. Bang! The 1-meter-thick tail ferociously slammed into the yellow barrier, creating a thunderous explosion that echoed throughout the forest. The barrier shuddered slightly and the yellow glow dimmed a little. However, that was all. Shangguan Bingshui continued to move forward without being injured in any way and had soon left behind the snake that was the fastest creature close to her. This small bell was precisely the object that Bai Zimin had given her just before she entered the mutated forest. It was his magic-grade treasure that he had acquired when he killed his first-order beast, and that treasure had saved her life, preventing the plan from collapsing and making everything more dangerous. Due to her speed and lightness, Shangguan Bingshui sprinted a few meters above the water of the lake, and just before she started to submerge, the water under her feet froze into small ice plagues. She stopped her footsteps abruptly and kicked hard as she made a full 360-degree turn. A wave of water several meters high rose as consequence, and before the wave of water fell on the giant worm, Shangguan Bingshui pointed her magic wand and shouted, "Freeze!" A cloud of frost came out from the tip of the wand and she fed it with her own mana. When the frost cloud touched the giant wave of water, it froze it completely, creating a beautiful ice sculpture almost 20 meters high. Moreover, the most impressive thing was that apart from the beauty of the ice wave, it was curiously pointed at the giant worm that was howling furiously at her. At this point, she had already done her best to pinpoint the main target that needed to be eliminated, thus fulfilling her main part in this whole business. "Now it's your turn to play your part, Bai Zimin," Shangguan Bingshui muttered as she ran in the opposite direction, being fervently pursued by the snake that had attacked her earlier and was now crawling through the water as it hissed with its tongue and glared fiercely at her. But she was not intimidated, and on the contrary, making use of the lake water, Shangguan Bingshui made dozens of ice pikes and began to attack the snake as she retreated. C92, Blood Berserker, First Order Bai Zimin and New Skill. Part 2. As Shangguan Bingshui went into the mutated forest to fulfill her most important part of the whole plan that had been worked out for part of the evening and most of the night, the atmosphere outside the forest was considerably quiet. The survivors were in the library several streets away, anxiously awaiting the triumphant return of the four main leaders of the group. While Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, Zhongde, and Konglan had stayed with the survivors to protect them, since with their current strength they had no chance against a first-order beast, they all knew that if Bai Zimin, Shangguan Bingshui, Chen He, and Liang Peng were defeated, then it was extremely improbable that the rest would be able to survive. After all, if even the four of them could not defeat the beasts in the forest, then it was only a matter of time before they were all devoured, since they would have no way to safely leave the university. On the other hand, Chen He and Liang Peng held on to their weapons tightly while their eyes remained fixed and focused on the trees and bushes several meters away. If a mutated animal or insect appeared, they were both prepared to attack immediately. Unlike the two of them, Bai Zimin was apparently more relaxed. Standing on top of one of the tallest buildings in the area, he stared ahead for several seconds in silence before asking in a low voice. "So? You're sure it's not a second-order beast, right?" Lilith chuckled and said lightly, "I already told you it's not. The creature inside that forest has a strange ability, but it's only at the top of the first order. It hasn't been able to advance yet. But if it's left as it is, then it could be problematic in the future." Bai Zimin secretly sighed in relief. As long as his enemy was not in the second order, even if it was a level 49 or 50 first-order existence, he was confident of coming out victorious regardless of what kind of skill his enemy had. What a pity! If only the death of that platinum ape yesterday had counted at this point, I might have successfully evolved to first order by now. He couldn't help but scratch his head with his free hand and sighed a little regretfully. "You think the soul record is that simple?" Lilith couldn't help but roll her eyes charmingly and pointed out, countless beings tried to circumvent the soul record and tried to explore or find some sort of loophole when it came to fulfilling evolutionary requirements, but they all failed miserably. Tell me more about it, please. Bai Zemin's ears perked up immediately and he felt curious about the story. Whenever the soul record presents an evolution requirement, that requirement must be completed correctly and only by the person who wishes to evolve. Lilith responded briefly but concisely, outside help is not allowed in any way. Also, if you use weapons of mass destruction or long-range weapons that you did not create with your own hands, you are likely to fail as well. Bai Zemin frowned and said hesitantly, this. So, let's say I shoot a first-order creature in the head. Ha ha ha. Lilith couldn't help but laugh. She looked at him with amusement and questioned, you think mana? An energy capable of forcing all existences to evolve or die, is that simple? Bai Zemin, except against zombies or other animals without evolving properly, normal firearms do not have the power to pierce the natural mana surrounding a first-order beast. To kill one, you'll probably need missiles or battle tanks. Maybe heavy machine guns will also do the trick. In fact, if you had used a firearm to kill your first enemy back then, there is a possibility that the soul record would deny you the loser's soul power depending on the circumstances. Lilith shrugged her shoulders and her voice was a bit bitter before concluding, as for how this works, don't ask me. The soul record is an entity that is still being studied even to this day. Bai Zemin couldn't help but gasp when he heard this and his eyes trembled with fear. Humans were weak by nature and most of them didn't even have the courage to fight. If firearms lost their effect, then how was humanity going to survive this apocalypse? As if she knew his thoughts, she reassured him with her soft voice, but don't worry too much. First-order creatures are not so normal since it's only been 11 days since the soul record reached this galaxy. As for second order, let's hope there aren't any yet, or humanity in that area would be annihilated unless they had truly outstanding military might. Bai Zemin smiled bitterly and shook his head. He only knew the world inside this university, how was he to know the situation outside? The only thing he hoped was that his loved ones or otherwise. He didn't even want to think about that. At least now he knew that the soul record was not an entity to be played with casually. Although it was pretty obvious if he thought about it more carefully. After all, just like Lilith said before, how could an entity capable of causing so many changes in the blink of an eye be simple? It was probably for the reasons Lilith mentioned earlier that those driving the buses did not receive any experience even though they killed several zombies by crushing them mercilessly. As Bai Zemin was lost in thought, a terrifying howl coming from inside the mutated forest caused his face to change and his expression turned serious. It's finally starting. He muttered as he raised the blood trident that glowed like a ruby over his shoulder, leaned his arm as far back as possible, and used blood manipulation on himself, focusing all his power and ability to perform a single strike. With his right foot behind and his left foot forward, Bai Zemin leaned his body slightly backward. His bright eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of frost as he looked up slightly in search of the accorded signal. Bang! An explosion echoed from within the mutated forest and soon after a wave of water more than 20 meters high rose into the sky. However, under the gaze of the three men present, the water wave moved in a strange direction before freezing into an ice statue. The corner of Bai Zemin's mouth curved upward slightly and he could not help but praise, what a beautiful sculpture. The right foot behind him suddenly stepped forward, overtaking the left foot by a wide margin, and the muscles of his right arm expanded to the maximum extent possible. Without delay, his right arm became like a whip that shot forward at full speed, and after reaching its maximum extension he released his grip on the blood trident. A split second before the blood trident left his hand, the blazing ring on his finger glowed and immediately a crimson radiance surrounded the trident covered by a layer of mana, raising the temperature of the surroundings to impressive heights. However, that was not all. Bang! The hurricane necklace resting on Bai Zemin's chest shone with a green glow and a tornado of wind perpendicular to the ground shot forward, reaching the blood trident surrounded by crimson flames in less than a second. Bang! With the strong wind impulse added to the great force with which Bai Zeman had launched it, the blood trident containing over 240 mana points broke the sound barrier, disappearing from everyone's sight and leaving several mock cones behind. You have learned the third order active skill Crimson Blood Judgment level 5. C93, Blood Berserker, first order Bai Zeman and new skill. Part 3 last. Inside the forest, Shang Guanbing Shui was engaged in a death match with the first order mutated snake. In her left hand was the magic wand, boosting her mana and magic stats by a large margin. In her right hand was an ice sword that had cost over 50% of her mana to make. Her beautiful angelic face was quite pale, but her eyes were as cold as the sword she wielded. Although the mutated snake's scales were incredibly tough and Shang Guanbing Shui could not pierce them, her physical and magical attacks contained a large amount of freezing power inside, so every swing of her sword or every time she crafted different ice weapons to attack a part of the snake's body over 20 meters long was frozen. The mutated snake hissed and its bloodshot eyes looked at its enemy with murderous intent. Its body shook and the layers of ice that were beginning to form broke into countless pieces that slowly fell to the ground. However, its blood was slowly beginning to cool and its movements were becoming increasingly stiff. Shang Guanbing Shui suddenly felt overwhelming danger of death after seeing how the mutated snake had its maw wide open. She didn't even think about it for a second as she immediately erected a thick wall of ice several meters high between her and the creature. A green cloud came out from inside the mutated snake's mouth a second later and clashed against the ice wall. The seemingly super sturdy ice wall began to erode at astonishing speeds visible to the naked eye. Bang! Suddenly there was a powerful explosion a few kilometers away, and the next thing Shang Guanbing Shui could see out of the corner of her eye was a bright crimson flash approaching at speeds impossible for her to comprehend. Bang! Before she could even comprehend what was happening, and after a huge blast that shook the earth slightly, the mutated forest began to burn fiercely and the beasts within began to howl and roar in anger and pain as the flames raged mercilessly. The mutated snake was distracted for a moment and stopped its skill. The beast seemed to notice something wrong and quickly began to slither towards the lake where the rest of the first order monsters were. Swoosh! Swoosh! Followed by two whistles of wind, two ice spears pierced the beast's two eyes crudely. The mutated snake stopped dead in its tracks and began to shake its body all over the place in pain. Shang Guanbing Shui hurriedly backed away while keeping her gaze fixed on the beast. The snake that was over 20 meters long slammed into some trees that were on fire in the process of constantly writhing and knocked them down with ease. She knew the crimson flames would soon reach her position, but instead of retreating she decided to rely on the bronze bell and charged forward, launching attack after attack at the now sightless first-order creature. As the victory drew closer and closer, she could not help but marvel and be frightened by the earlier attack. She had no idea what it was that Bai Zeman had fired before, but the destructive power of that attack did not lose in the slightest to the destruction that a couple of missiles could cause. However, she knew there were no missiles here, let alone ways to use them even if there were. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Third order active skill? Bai Zeman's mind rushed at the speed of light as he saw the green message flashing across his retina at the same time as he marveled at the trail of crimson fire blazing in the sky. However, circumstances did not allow him to focus too much as a flurry of green-lettered messages began flashing in his retina one after another. Critical hit. Bai Zeman's lips curved upward. His face, pale from all the mana consumption, recovered as if by magic, and he could feel himself becoming terrifyingly much stronger than before. He had succeeded. He had completed a task that had been given to him alone in all recorded history, as he was the only person with the qualifications to fulfill it. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Mana Embryo level 48. Kill unranked enemies using blood manipulation with a single attack 100/100. Kill First Order enemy using blood manipulation on yourself 2 halves. Kill First Order enemy with a single attack using blood manipulation on yourself 1/1. You have successfully evolved to First Order and have become Blood Berserker. Attack power increases by 20% when using axes, spears, swords, maces, or bare hands. Your blood attacks become 20% more effective. When facing more powerful enemies, your attack power increases by 20%. You have learned second order passive skill Blood Will level 5. You have reached level 31 and get 12 status points to distribute freely. All soul power accumulated during the evolution process has been calculated. You get additional stats: strength plus 65, agility plus 43, stamina plus 43, magic plus 40, health plus 35, mana plus 30. You have fulfilled the necessary requirements to evolve 2 skills. You have received the title One Hit to Kill. After calculating the soul power of the Shadow Tiger, the Platinum Ape, the Mana Embryo, as well as that of a few thousand zombies, insects, and mutated animals, Bai Zeman obtained a stat boost of approximately 30% compared to his previous one before evolving. Because he had already hunted some first-order creatures, the additional stats he obtained from enemies within that category gradually became less as his own soul power began to adapt to that range of evolution. In fact, now that he had reached the first order, it was likely that the soul power he obtained from such enemies would become even thinner, as he was also within the same category, unlike in the past. However, a boost of approximately 30% in overall strength was something fearsome, not to mention that he was currently past level 30 and had several tens of status points reserved for times of crisis. The number of green-lettered messages flashing across his retina were too many, so Bai Zeman could not pay attention to them all at the moment, as the battle had only just begun. After all he had done was to kill the central problem that had been marked with masterful accuracy by Shangguan Bing Shui, but there were still more enemies left inside the forest. But none of that mattered at the moment. Bai Zeman could read in careful detail when all this was over once and for all. Because the most important thing was that he had finally leveled up, fully recovering to his maximum and going even higher. The level up that occurred in the process of the wall blocking his growth became completely ragged, and that was all that mattered. His path was finally clear once again, and he didn't have to worry about stagnating. Roar! The thunderous roars of dozens of mutated monsters echoed everywhere as the mutated forest began to burn increasingly out of control, fueled by the wind from the previous hurricane as well as the gasoline and infamous oil that had been spread by the group led by Fu Suifeng and Zhongde earlier. C94, Powerful Bai Zeman. Although Bai Zeman's previous attack, which transformed into a skill called Crimson Blood Judgment, had not come into direct contact with the forest floor, the temperature of the flame from the blazing ring propelled by the strong tornado from the hurricane necklace had enough power to ignite the grass several meters below. When the heat from the flame came in contact with the gasoline and highly flammable oil spread earlier, the ground automatically began to burn. In addition, due to the wind from the hurricane, all the flames began to spread southward, slowly burning the forest and getting closer and closer to the center. Suddenly, the ground began to shake and the earth rumbled as if an earthquake was shaking the world. However, it was clear to Bai Zeman and the other 2 men present that what caused the rumbling was not an earthquake. Roar! A giant elephant beetle roared with its head held high as it ran in a straight line directly toward the buildings. Its body was surrounded by yellow flames that protected it from the crimson flames. However, the creature was obviously expending a lot of mana to keep its skill active at all times. Following right behind the giant elephant beetle, 2 mutated dogs whose fur looked like an iron plate, 2 black-furred tigers, 3 green-spotted cats, 5 huge snakes that were even bigger than a normal python before the apocalypse, and a fat bee with a 2-meter stinger were rapidly approaching, carrying murderous intent with bloodshot eyes. The blood disappeared from Chen He and Liang Peng's faces at the sight of such a monstrous lineup of evolved beasts. It's the end. Liang Peng couldn't help but exclaim as he tightened his grip on his hammer and prepared to fight to the death. Being the slowest of the 3, Liang Peng knew that running away was an impossibility for him, so he had no choice but to fight whether he wanted to or not. On the other hand, Chen He was not only scared by the sight but also for Shangguan Bing Shui. Did something happen to her? Considering the number of beasts that came out of the forest, the chances of her surviving were not very high. Soon we'll join up again. he thought as he raised his crossbow and aimed at the flying bee with eyes filled with sadness. In the midst of all this atmosphere, only Bai Zeman had an indifferent expression. He looked at the first order blazing beetle and couldn't help but blank out for a split second, remembering his battle to the death against a creature of the same type. "Let me see how strong I've become," he muttered under his breath and narrowed his eyes as he placed one foot on the edge of the building before lunging forward with all his might. Bang! The edge of the building's concrete roof tore into pieces and Bai Zeman transformed into a shadow hard to notice by the naked eye. Still in the air and taking advantage of gravity's momentum, Bai Zeman made a complete turn and while holding on to the Xianyuan sword slashed downward. Without skill and without any elegant style, pure strength and speed. Boom! The speed of the blazing beetle was not particularly fast and even back then Bai Zeman managed to win precisely by making use of his superior agility, not to mention now that he had become countless times stronger. The first order beast did not even understand the situation and by the time it realized what was happening it was already too late. The Xianyuan sword, a treasure capable of piercing through the defenses of almost any creature below level 40, might have difficulty piercing through the blazing beetle's defenses in normal times. After all, it was a mostly defensive beast. However, the current Bai Zeman was capable of raising the sword's power to new heights due to his strength. His attack struck firmly right on top of the giant horn, causing a thunderous explosion. His eyes filled with murderous intent met the beast's disbelieving gaze for a moment before something terrifying happened. Crack! 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 Bang! Small-sized cracks began to appear from the point of impact before spreading throughout the horn. However, that was not all. Roar! The fiery beetle's eyes quivered in shock and it staggered back several steps as it roared in pain. Not because of the loss of its main weapon, but because its shell was cracking as well. Under the surprised gaze of the two men behind, cracks spread across the entire metal armor of the blazing beetle before bursting into pieces. The creature roared again in pain and the yellow flames that belonged to it were extinguished as crimson flames were expelled by the shockwave of the previous attack. Flash! There was a sharp flash and the next instant the roars of the blazing beetle came to a complete stop. Right in the center of the beast's head appeared a red line from which blood began to flow slowly. Splash! The head split in two and blood splattered everywhere, staining the cracked ground and attracting the attention of the other first-order creatures that were using the blazing beetle as a front charge to escape the crimson flames setting the forest ablaze. You have acquired the soul power of the first-order blazing beetle level 31. Mana plus 24, Magic plus 15, Health plus 12, Stamina plus 8, Strength plus 5. Standing over the now collapsed body of the blazing beetle, Bai Zeman's gaze was indifferent and he couldn't help but sigh. Who would have thought that a little over a week ago he had almost been killed by a monster of the same type he had just slain so easily? Back then, Bai Zeman was on the verge of death countless times, and even though he won it was a miserable victory. Moreover, something that surprised him was that he also received another message. Blood will activated. For the next 5 minutes, increase your overall attack power by 1% for each enemy killed and 0.1% for each surrounding enemy alive up to a maximum of 50%. Current status, 2.3%/50%. Too bad, he didn't have time to study things too much since he was in the middle of a battlefield. Swoosh! 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 Suddenly the wind swooshed and Bai Zeman couldn't help but let his expression change slightly. Without delay he hurriedly jumped forward, barely escaping from danger. Right at the place where he was standing before, several green orbs struck the flesh of the blazing beetle and under Bai Zeman's astonished gaze the flesh began to be corroded quickly. With narrowed eyes, he saw the 5 snakes looking at him coldly. A strange green liquid was still coming out of their mouths and every time a drop reached the ground the earth steamed and small holes formed. Bai Zeman identified the snakes as a dangerous target and quickly charged forward. The snakes were not idle either as they began to bombard him spitting acid-laden green orbs. Bai Zimin did not dare to take the giant mutated snake's attacks head-on as he was not confident that his full coat would be able to withstand the acid corrosion, so he quickly began to move in a zigzagging motion. C95, Fighting the First Order. Part 1. Bang! 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 The 5 mutated snakes blasted acidic orbs non-stop at Bai Zimin. If just one of those orbs hit him, even with his full coat he would not necessarily be able to escape unscathed, and if he received a direct attack on his hands, feet, or worse yet his head, then that part of his body would undoubtedly begin to corrode. However, for such a thing to happen, the mutant snakes needed to somehow be able to match Bai Zimin's agility, or at least be able to see his movements somewhat in advance. Bai Zimin's body flashed across the battlefield like a ghost as he skillfully dodged the acidic orbs flying in his direction, trying to close the distance between him and the 5 far-off mutant snakes he had identified as the greatest present danger to his life. With nearly 17 times the speed of a normal human before the apocalypse, a few hundred meters was a distance he could close in a couple of blinks. However, the mutated snakes were not his only enemy, and activating blood manipulation from so far away would not give him the result he was looking for. Swoosh! Suddenly, one of the 2 shadow tigers charged forward and lunged at him with its mouth wide open, revealing sharp teeth with dried blood stains on the inside. Bai Zimin advanced instead of retreating and slashed with his sword diagonally. A split second later, after a sharp flash where the shadow tiger and he crossed paths, the beast's head came off its body cleanly and rolled on the ground as blood splattered everywhere. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Shadow Tiger level 37. You have acquired plus 17 agility, plus 15 stamina, plus 10 strength, plus 6 health. You have reached level 32. You gain 2 status points to distribute freely. Blood will, 3.2%/50%. Not even a second had passed when Bai Zimin saw out of the corner of his eye the other First Order Shadow Tiger less than a meter away. The mutated tigers were incredibly fast, and in this position, it was impossible for him to move in time to defend or dodge. However, roar! The First Order Shadow Tiger roared painfully as more than a dozen blood spears rose up from the blood of the dead Shadow Tiger, piercing its body all over from the bottom up and stopping it in mid-air. The beast did not manage to give a second roar of pain as Bai Zimin turned 360 degrees and decapitated it with ease, sending its head flying into the air. You have received the soul power of First Order Shadow Tiger level 38. You have acquired agility plus 10, stamina plus 6, strength plus 4, health plus 1. You have reached level 33. You gain 2. Blood will, 4.1%/50%. Without delay, Bai Zimin jumped to the side to evade the snake's attacks while his mind quickly processed the previous mana expenditure. Approximately 15 blood spears had consumed about 40 mana points. If it were in the past, the amount would probably be double or more, proving how useful his previous training had been. If Bai Zimin had trained alone without enemies, the results would not be as good as they were currently. F***CK. It had only been less than 5 seconds since Bai Zimin had engaged in combat with the mutated First Order beasts, but 3 of them had already been killed. Even the naturally well-spoken Chen He couldn't help but curse. That kind of power! It was simply insane. The terrifying evolved beasts in his hands seemed to be as weak as a newborn puppy. Chen He raised his crossbow and instead of shooting at the giant bee, he aimed at the 5 snakes slithering all over the battlefield. He was smart enough to know that he did not have the ability to pierce through those glowing scales, therefore, he aimed for the eyes. Since the mutated snakes were the biggest problem, then Chen He half closed his eyes and relaxed his breathing before pulling the trigger. His right hand moved strangely and the crossbow shuddered. If anyone saw it they would think it was due to nerves, but they couldn't be more wrong. The 5 arrows imbued with mana sliced through the air, moving at speeds almost on par with a bullet. But the most surprising thing was that the 5 were not moving in a straight line and slowly separated from the trajectory they were traveling. The 5 snakes opened their jaws just as the 2 mutated dogs charged toward Bai Zimin. However, just before they could fire their skill, their eyes blasted out in a bloody mist. The 5 snakes involuntarily cancelled their skill and hissed in pain as they writhed furiously all over. Their scales were one of the strongest defenses among first-order creatures, yet their eyes were the weakness of any living thing. As they writhed in pain, 4 of them collapsed the walls of some nearby buildings while one of them viciously struck one of the green-spotted mutated cats that were also charging towards Bai Zimin, blowing it away and sending it crashing into an adjacent building. The mutated cat had an agility-based proficiency, but its defense was among the lowest. Therefore, after being struck by a crazed mutated snake whose scales were incredibly hard and whose flesh was tightly compressed, the internal organs of the beast that did not expect such an attack broke out, killing it immediately. The wind howled and the 2 mutated cats that charged towards Bai Zimin suddenly stopped and began to attack the mutated snake that had killed the other mutated cat, becoming entangled in a battle to the death. The mutated snakes had high defense and great strength. A single blow was enough to end the life of a green-spotted mutated cat. However, the mutated cats were not easy prey either. One of the cats leaped forward and its claws glowed with a pale green glow. The beast slashed viciously and tore through the mutated snake's defenses with ease, tearing a large chunk of flesh and causing the snake to howl in pain. The snake hissed painfully and attacked with its tail again. But the mutant cat had already seen the miserable fate of its companion, so it hastily jumped to the side, avoiding a certain death by a hair's breadth. In addition, the other mutant cat also joined the fray, and between the 2 of them began to slowly wear down the mutated snake. You have received the soul power of First Order Spiny Dog level 35. You have acquired Magic plus 10, Mana plus 10, Strength plus 5, Agility plus 2. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Spiny Dog level 36. You have acquired Magic plus 5, Mana plus 4, Strength plus 2. Blood Will, 5.8%. Nice. Bai Zimin ended the lives of the 2 mutated dogs and couldn't help but praise when he saw the mutated snakes that were giving him a headache writhing all over the place with one of their eyes covered in blood. He couldn't get close before because the 5 snakes were extremely cunning and surrounded him, attacking from places that made it difficult for him to reach. However, thanks to Chen He's timely intervention, that problem was now gone. Bang! Bai Zimin stomped on the ground and cracks spread everywhere before he disappeared from his position. C96, Fighting the First Order. Part 2 last. After disappearing from his position and without having to change his course consistently after losing the harassment of the mutant snakes, Bai Zimin's terrifying speed, now unimpeded, was on full display. With nearly 200 agility points, the distance between him and one of the mutated snakes was closed in a moment. The beast hissed in pain and upon seeing him immediately retaliated by spitting out an orb of acid. Bai Zimin leaned at an unnatural angle to the left as if his body was made of rubber, avoiding what could be certain death. Taking advantage of that same movement, he swung his sword from above downward and fiercely slashed the mutated snake's body. Clang! Surprisingly, the mutated snake's scales could not be cut, and for the first time since he obtained the Xianyuan sword, he failed to break through his enemy's defenses. Not only were the snake's scales extremely tough, but Bai Zimin could also feel a strange slippery liquid that when he cut earlier caused the sword blade to slip and lose a great deal of its power. The mutated snake swung its tail like a whip and struck forward with a look filled with murderous intent. The power of its tail was terrifying enough to slay another first-order creature with a single strike, which was proof enough of how dreadful it was. However, Bai Zimin secretly sneered, and instead of dodging, he stepped forward as he slammed his left fist fiercely. Bang! When the human's small fist and the beast's tail with a thickness of over a meter collided, the normally expected scene of the human being crushed did not happen. The mutated snake hissed painfully once again and its body was sent flying like a kite with a broken string before thunderously slamming into a building and collapsing it in the process. Bai Zimin did not give the creature time to prepare and lunged forward while sheathing his sword. After arriving next to the snake, he sat on top of its head and clamped his legs tightly around it before beginning to strike mercilessly with both fists. Bang! 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 The difference between the previous Bai Zeman and the current one was not small by any means. After evolving to First Order and successfully acquiring his Berserker blood job, he gained a great increase of power not only in the stats scrolling on his status window. As a Berserker, Bai Zeman's attack power increased by 20% when he used certain weapons or his bare hands, therefore, his strikes at this time were actually several times more powerful than normal and, as if this wasn't enough, he was also receiving a boost of almost 6% thanks to his new passive skill not yet observed by him. The mutated snake opened its single eye wide and howled in pain. The beast began to writhe endlessly but failed to shake Bai Zeman in any way. Even when it hit other buildings in the process, it failed to shake him off its back. Its scales split and blood began to flow, but Bai Zeman's blows did not stop, and in less than 2 seconds he had already struck a few dozen times. The mutated snake's wild movements slowed down noticeably and the sparkle in its eyes slowly faded, showing that its life was coming to an end. Swoosh! Bai Zeman sensed danger from behind, but he didn't need to turn around to know who the attacker was this time. Just judging by the sound of the wind, it was obvious that it wasn't any of the other 3 mutated snakes, it was the giant bee. He laughed coldly, and as his fists blasted against the mutated snake's head, he said nonchalantly, "Wall of blood." Surprisingly, a 2-meter-high wall rose from the pool of blood accumulated from the death of so many sizable beasts, separating him and the giant bee. Mana's expenditure this time had been considerable, 20 points to raise the wall. But this was also normal since he had not yet mastered this new energy in any way, and like Shangguan Bingshui had only an initial understanding. However, what happened next was most surprising. When the giant bee's sting hit the wall, it seemed to pass through it as if it were a puddle of water, without any difficulty whatsoever. In fact, it even formed ripples as if the wall of blood was not in a solid state. The giant bee's body began to glow slightly and gradually its size began to increase. It was obviously absorbing enemy blood to become more powerful. However, how could Bai Zeman have forgotten about the mutated bee he killed on the first day of the apocalypse? Back then, the big bee had absorbed some of the zombie's body to become stronger. Berserkers were known as a melee class with an attack power even more powerful than that of warriors in most role-playing games. However, Bai Zeman was actually a blood berserker. What was the difference? Magic. Blood spears. Bai Zeman's voice echoed throughout the battlefield. The wall of blood suddenly opened and 2 huge red spears shot out like a torpedo. The giant bee did not even have time to retreat when its 2 wings were sliced wide open by the 2 spears that pierced through its weak defense with ease. The creature let out a strange yell and fell to the ground, unable to do anything but shake its body. Without its wings, the giant bee did not have enough power to move as it would like, since its weight was too great for it, which had evolved by absorbing mana and not by absorbing soul power. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Jiaolao Snake level 45. You have acquired Strength plus 4, Stamina plus 2. You have reached level 34. Blood Will, 6.7%/50%. He dashed forward at full speed without rest, and before the mutated bee could even howl in pain, its head was ripped off its body after a sharp flash. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Blood-Sucking Bee level 39. You have acquired Agility plus 5. Blood Will, 7.6%/50%. Gradually, the soul power he received from First Order creatures became thinner. The evolution experience was still corresponding, but the additional stats were less. As to whether it would stop or not, he didn't know yet. Bang! Suddenly there was a bang on the battlefield, and Bai Zeman arrived just in time to see Lin Feng hitting one of the mutated cats with green spots and sending it flying with his hammer. Oh! Bai Zeman raised an eyebrow and was surprised to see that while he was killing, Chen He and Lin Feng hadn't been slacking off either. Apparently, at some point, one of the green-spotted mutated cats had been hit by the mutated snake, getting seriously injured. The mutated snake was still locked in a battle to the death with the other green-spotted mutated cat, so it could not break away, and Liang Peng took the opportunity to finish off the second cat. As for Chen he was currently moving all over the place while shooting arrows at the last mutated snake that was chasing him. Although his arrows did not possess the power to pierce through the snake's defenses, as they were just normal arrows empowered by a bit of mana, they did cause enough pain to make the creature enraged. The mutated snake was faster, but Chen was cunning and jumped from building to building without getting caught. Every time a building was demolished, he jumped to another and continued. Moreover, the mutated snake did not dare to stop to cast acidic orbs, as it seemed to remember the consequences by feeling the pain in one of its now empty sockets. Thanks to the two of them, Bai Zimin had not been disturbed for a couple of seconds and was able to finish off two more first-order beasts. As for the last mutated snake, apparently, the beast realized that things were not looking good and quickly turned to flee. When Bai Zimin noticed it, he barely caught a glimpse of the beast's tail disappearing into the crimson flames in the direction of the forest. Using that liquid as a protective layer, the mutated snake might have a chance to flee in another direction, but if it stayed, it would definitely be slaughtered sooner rather than later. C97, Shang Guan Bing Shui in danger? The green-spotted mutated cat that was facing the mutated snake was breathing heavily, and the glow on its claws had dimmed considerably. Its speed had slowed by at least 50% and its entire body was bathed in sweat and dust. On the other hand, the mutated snake was riddled with slashes across the length and breadth of its body, revealing red flesh and gushing blood. The red glow in its eyes had dimmed and its movements had become heavier than normal. Although the battle between the two creatures had only lasted a few seconds so far, both had given 101% of their total in order to end the life of the other. A single mistake could cost anyone their life, so during those few seconds they had activated their innate skill countless times, depleting stamina and mana without reserve. To grow stronger, to evolve, to take a step beyond. Each existence might have different motives, but they all wanted to stand victorious. Unfortunately, the destiny of the green-spotted mutant cat and the destiny of the Jiaolao snake was not to advance. Swoosh! The wind whistled noisily, and all the green-spotted mutant cat could see out of the corner of its eye was the metallic luster of a blade approaching its neck. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Gale Cat level 40. You have acquired Agility plus 3. Blood Will, 8.2%/50%. The creature's head shot skyward, and the bright red blood of the Gale Cat was reflected in the eye of the Jiaolao snake. That was the last the beast could see before its head was severed from its body as well. You have acquired the soul power of First Order Jiaolao Snake level 43. Blood Will, 9.1%/50%. No more extra stats from the Jiaolao Snake soul power, et. Bai Zimin sighed as he shook the blood off his sword. Since the Jiaolao snake was weakened and riddled with wounds, killing it was easier than usual. Although it was a pity not to get more stats like that, it was something Bai Zimin expected to happen sooner or later. He stomped the ground beneath his feet and shot forward, following the booming sound a few hundred meters away. It only took him a couple of seconds to circle around the collapsed buildings to see the last living first-order beast chasing after Chen and demolishing every building in its path with its tail. Such a scene was worthy of a science fiction movie, but now it was happening in reality right in front of his eyes. Even the most skeptical would be forced to accept that the world would never be the same in the face of such a horrifying view. The Jiaolao snake seemed to be able to sense Bai Zimin's overwhelming soul power as its head turned in his direction and looked at him coldly before lunging towards him as it constantly shot out acidic orbs. That won't work if you're alone. Bai Zimin muttered and suddenly disappeared from his previous position. His speed burst completely, and in the next instant, he appeared right under the beast's body, right under its jaw. Boom! With a boost in his attack power of almost 30%, Bai Zimin's fist fiercely connected with the Jiaolao snake's jaws, sending it flying. However, to his and Chen He's surprise, the creature did not stand up again, and two orbs of light entered their bodies soon after, indicating the death of the enemy. You have reached level 35. Blood Will, 10%. Apparently, Bai Zemin's blow had succeeded in destroying the brain from the outside, killing the creature with a punch. Bai Zemin gave Chen He a thumbs up before bending down to pick up the red-colored orb that had fallen next to the Jiaolao snake's death. In fact, not only had this snake dropped a treasure orb. For to Bai Zemin's delight, all the First Order creatures had dropped at least one red orb. Could it be that after the First Order there is always treasure? Bai Zemin would have to ask Lilith later. Hey, Bai Zemin! Chen He approached agitated and tired, but his eyes were filled with worry as he anxiously asked, Bing Xuet? She's still not back. Shangguan Bing Xuet. Bai Zemin blinked before looking around. Between the excitement of successfully evolving to First Order, acquiring a powerful initial job, and the bloody battle against a dozen First Order existences, Bai Zemin hadn't had time to think too much about anything, so he only now realized that Shangguan Bing Shui was nowhere to be seen. The two men looked at the burning forest with different thoughts. Could she have been killed by those First Order beasts? Chen He asked in a low voice as he clenched his fists tightly. Bai Zemin remained silent and looked up at a building that was still intact in the midst of so much destruction. There, standing at the top, an incredibly beautiful woman to the point of taking the breath away from anyone who saw her was looking at him with a bright smile. Her hair waved in sync with the wind and her ruby eyes made her look like an angel from heaven if it weren't for the enchanting aura of a demon that surrounded her. As if she knew what he wanted to ask just by his gaze, Lilith's voice reached his ears, You have made this big sister very happy, little Zemin. This is the first time I see or hear about a First Order existence capable of wiping out a dozen in less than a minute and practically single-handedly. I wonder what you will become when you advance further in the order? Will you be able to satisfy this big sister in bed? Bai Zemin almost spat out 2 liters of blood when he heard her last sentence. However, to his surprise, she sounded genuinely pleased and joyful, as if seeing his previous performance was a great delight to her. That aside, Lilith looked at the burning forest and said lazily, that lower existence called Shangguan Bing Shui is not dead. She's still alive, but you'd better hurry if you want to get her out of there. He nodded imperceptibly and looked at Chen He before saying indifferently, You wait here. I'll go get her out. Go with Liang Peng and take care of the treasures until I return. What? Chen He blinked and looked to his side only to realize that Bai Zemin had already disappeared and was now several dozen meters away. His face turned pale as he realized how horrifying Bai Zemin's speed was and unconsciously glanced at the First Order Jiaolao snake's body. However, Chen He soon processed what he told him before and his eyes shone. Take her out? So she was still alive. His legs felt weak and he had to force himself forward. He had to protect those treasures, or if Liang Peng did something stupid then no one would be able to stop Bai Zemin if he went crazy. Let alone now that he had seen what Bai Zemin was capable of actually doing during this battle to the death. C98, Close Contact. The reasons why Bai Zemin decided to help Shangguan Bing Shui were varied. One of the reasons was because she still had his bronze bell in her hands. The bronze bell was a very important magic-grade treasure for Bai Zemin as it was currently his safest defense and he could not afford to lose such an item casually, as he did not know if he would be able to obtain another one anytime soon. In fact, the only reason he lent the bronze bell to Shangguan Bing Shui at that time was because his breakthrough to First Order and the acquisition of his blood berserker job depended largely on whether she succeeded in pinpointing the location of a First Order creature. That way, he would be able to prepare his strongest attack from a distance great enough for his killing intent to be sensed by his enemy, or he might end up failing miserably, and if he failed even he would have to flee poorly or be killed by the army of First Order creatures. As for the other reason he decided to help her was to make her owe him a favor just as he owed her in the past. Shangguan Bing Shui had mysterious origins, and even if the world had changed, her family had not necessarily collapsed. She was a proud woman and would certainly do her best to return the favor of saving her life even if he did not ask for it. Besides, she was currently an important asset to the group of survivors, as there was no way Bai Zemin's eyes and arms could cover nearly 500 people, he needed survivors or else the difficulty of reaching his family would become 1,000 times harder. In the current group of survivors, not only Fu Suifeng, Cai Jingii, Zhongde, and Kong Lan had the courage to fight. In fact, there were several male and female students who joined later who had enough courage to fight as long as they were given an appropriate weapon. When they finally left the university, things would be completely different than they were now, and Bai Zimin wanted to take advantage of that. *******. Arriving at the edge of the forest practically covered by burning crimson flames, Bai Zimin stopped and frowned under contemplation. If he had his bronze bell, it would be a simple task to exit and enter the place, since with his current agility he could definitely travel several kilometers in about 1 minute. But without proper protection, even if he had evolved to become a first-order existence, he would definitely be injured and might even die. After all, even powerful beasts with high defense like the blazing beetle and the Jiaolao snake were forced to flee from the flames, let alone him. After considering the problem for several seconds, he finally gritted his teeth and pulled out several bottles of blood before starting to spray his entire body from head to toe. In a few blinks of an eye he had become a red person, and only the color of his eyes differed. The rancid smell of blood was truly foul, but his options were too tight at this point. Bai Zimin activated his blood manipulation skill, and the blood on his body shimmered under the stimulus of the mana. Soon, the blood that constantly collated hardened, forming a thin insulating layer that separated him from his surroundings. "Just close your eyes and move forward, I will guide you." Lilith appeared beside him and patted his shoulder lightly. Bai Zimin nodded and wordlessly stomped hard on the ground beneath his feet, lunging forward and stepping into the sea of flames. His current speed with an agility of over 190 points was equivalent to almost 20 times faster than a person before the apocalypse. This meant that at his maximum he could overtake a supercar with ease before the arrival of the soul record on Earth. Bai Zimin's body flashed through the flames under the guidance of Lilith, who followed closely, unaffected by the surroundings. The embracing heat seemed intent on devouring his existence completely, and the solidified blood covering his body would have long ago evaporated already if it weren't for Bai Zimin constantly feeding the layer of blood with mana. However, even with his over 300 mana points, it was a terrifying expenditure that he could not sustain for too long. After all, the Crimson Flame was the remnant of a third-order skill. While it wasn't as strong now after the skill was cast, it still wasn't something that some blood of a first-order beast could casually endure. Knowing that time was running against him like every passing second since the beginning of the apocalypse, Bai Zimin focused on Lilith's guidance and exploiting his speed to the maximum extent possible. The muscles in his legs tightened to the point where if it weren't for his high stamina and health they would have been torn long ago. About half a minute later, Lilith's voice sounded magically in his ears, "Right in front of you is a lake. That woman is inside." Bai Zimin didn't even think about it and jumped in, entering the water that was evaporating at terrifying speeds. He cancelled his blood manipulation skill and the blood on his body was immediately washed away by the water. When Bai Zimin finally opened his eyes under the crystal clear water, the first thing he saw was the beautiful Shangguan Bingshui submerged underwater, looking at him with her blue eyes wide open. It was as if she was asking him what he was doing there and why he had come. Too bad, Bai Zimin couldn't talk underwater, and neither could she, or else he would have told her, "Nothing, I just came shopping." He approached to her and saw that her face was starting to get redder and redder as a result of the lack of air. Holding her breath for a minute or two was fine, since even if she didn't possess high physical stats she wasn't weak either. The problem was that considering the time of the explosion and release of the flames so far, a couple of minutes had already passed and she had been forced to hide underwater. Bai Zimin quickly pointed to the bronze bell, and fortunately she seemed to understand what he meant as she immediately nodded and passed it to him. Fortunately there was still some power left inside the bell before the treasure lost its energy and had to be recharged for a whole day. He naturally had no intention of kissing her like in romantic movies to share his oxygen with her. Bai Zimin turned around and pointed to his back while looking into her eyes, indicating her to jump up on his back. Shangguan Bingshui secretly gritted her teeth and did not hesitate as she climbed on his back, riding him like a horse. Moreover, to his surprise, she did not doubt to wrap both arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, easing the burden on him immensely. Bang! Bai Zimin stepped onto the bottom of the lake fiercely and taking advantage of the momentum jumped upwards. While normally it would be difficult for a human's strength to fight against the pressure of the water on the body, for him it was a matter of effort. In just an instant his body together with Shangguan Bingshui, who clung to him tightly, broke the surface of the lake that was struggling uselessly against the crimson flames. C99, Blood Wool. Upon returning to the surface, crimson flames immediately began to assault them both. However, before they could even touch the corner of their clothes, the bronze bell flew out of Bai Zemin's pant pocket and floated above his head, releasing a faint glow that surrounded the two of them. Bai Zemin began to run madly forward without stopping, surprising Shangguan Bingshui by his frightening speed but at the same time easing her worries. She unconsciously sighed in relief and the tension in her body disappeared, causing her to relax on his back as she looked at the crimson world around them. No matter where she looked, all she could see was a blazing fire. Earlier, after killing a first-order beast alone for the first time, Shangguan Bingshui noticed that the fire had surrounded the forest from the south to the east and then spread to the northern area, practically sealing off the exit. With no other choice, she remembered the water lake and returned to the place to seek cover. Although the bronze bell had power remaining, with her current agility it was impossible to close the distance between the center and the exit of the forest in less than a minute and she would be stranded halfway. Fortunately, Bai Zemin's agility was just enough to get out unscathed with the support of the magic barrier. ******. Outside the flaming mutated forest, Chen He waited anxiously beside Liang Peng. After collecting the treasure orbs and also a few skill scrolls that had been transmuted by the soul record from the soul power of the first-order creatures killed earlier, Chen He had not stopped looking in the direction of the burning forest. "Damn it, can you stop moving?" Liang Peng couldn't help but curse as he looked at Chen He. "You've been walking back and forth and it's only been 2 minutes since you came here. You're getting on my nerves." Chen He did not respond to him nor did he seem to listen to what Liang Peng said. He was only worried about Shangguan Bingshui and no matter what anyone else said it was not going to change by mere words. Tisk. Liang Peng clicked his tongue and muttered something that only he could hear but they were obviously not too nice words. Bang. Suddenly there was a bang from within the flames and when the two men looked over they arrived just in time to see two people surrounded by a thin layer of yellow energy in the air. They finally came out. Chen He was extremely happy to see that both of them had returned. Of course, he was happier for Shangguan Bingshui but he was also glad that Bai Zemin had not encountered any problems holding him back. Liang Peng looked at him and wanted to say something seeing how close those two seemed but in the end, he swallowed his words not wanting to ruin the mood. After almost 2 weeks of living together and working as a team, everyone was starting to get closer to each other. Bang! The ground broke out and dirt flew everywhere as Bai Zemin fell back down from over 10 meters high, planting both feet firmly on the ground. His face was slightly pale and his forehead was covered with sweat as his agitated breathing constantly made his chest rise and fall. "Bingshui, are you okay?" Chen He hurried over and looked her over from head to toe, still not noticing by the close contact they were having. "You don't need to worry, I'm fine." But he... Shangguan Bingshui got off Bai Zemin's back and looked at him with a frown before asking, "Are you okay?" Bai Zemin waved his hand without replying and walked with heavy steps over to the corpse of one of the Jiaolao snakes to sit on it. Why? Why am I so tired?" Bai Zemin was dumbfounded. With his stamina, he should be able to fight for several hours without tiring and although the battle to the death against the small army of first-order beasts was fierce, it had not been to the point of consuming so much stamina as to leave him in such a miserable state. Bai Zemin. Status points, 52. Level, 35. Race, Human. Job, Blood Berserker, Blood Will Mode. Title, One Hit to Kill. Strength, 161, plus 30, / Agility, 186, plus 5, / Health, 158, plus 5, /stamina, 202/282, plus 5, /mana, 292, plus 40, /magic, 249, plus 60. Skills, Blood Manipulation, First Order, LVL 5/Special Forces Soldier, Unranked Passive Skill, LVL 5/Stoneheart, Third Order Passive Skill, LVL 5/Health Boost, Unranked Passive Skill, LVL 3/Bronze Skin, First Order Passive Skill, LVL 1/Throwing, Unranked Passive Skill, LVL 5/Regeneration, First Order, LVL 5/Blood Will, Second Order Passive Skill, LVL 5/Crimson Blood Judgment, Third Order, LVL 5. In fact, he still had a lot of stamina. However, Bai Zimin frowned and realized that he had lost 80 stamina points in a matter of 4 or 5 minutes, which was completely unnatural. The reason he suddenly felt so tired was precisely because of such an abrupt loss of almost 1/3 of his total stamina in such a short time. Bai Zimin's status window had practically changed completely after evolving to First Order, as he had finally made the first little big step. However, what caught his attention the most was the words Blood Will mode next to his job Berserker Blood. Blood Will, Second Order Passive Skill, LVL 5, going into combat mode awakens the desire for the battle that slumbers in your veins. You gain 0.1% additional attack power for every living enemy 100 meters around you and 1% for every enemy killed. The effect is limited to a maximum of 50%. The effect lasts 5 minutes and the timer resets to 0 for each enemy update. Secondary effect, consumes 20 stamina points every 50 seconds as a consequence of the abrupt increase of power. The side effect is cancelled when the user goes out of combat mode. Bai Zimin sighed and finally understood the reason why he had lost so much stamina abruptly. Don't get so depressed. Lilith tapped his shoulder and smiled brightly. Blood Will is an incredibly powerful skill to be just classified as second order. Of course it would have some side effect or it would be nonsense. You should know that even I don't have a skill that increases my power by 50%. Bai Zimin nodded and said nothing to avoid being looked at as if he had gone mad, but looked at her with grateful eyes. If it wasn't for Lilith's moral support, he might not be able to stand as firmly as he did now. Besides, even though Blood Will had an annoying side effect, it wasn't as if he had no way to fight it. Although he could not solve the problem in its entirety, he could lighten the consequences to a great extent. After all, Bai Zimin had acquired the First Order Regeneration skill. This skill allowed him to consume mana to obtain stamina in return, which was perfect for cases where he had to fight to the death and did not need to use magic skills, or the effects of magic were not as efficient as was the case with the First Order anti-magic zombie. C100, waiting anxiously. As Bai Zimin sat down to get some rest before returning to important business, he didn't even feel like looking at his newly acquired skills, nor did he feel like looking at which 2 skills he could evolve. The battle against the First Order beasts had not drained his stamina to dangerous levels even when Blood Will had been draining much of it. However, the mental exhaustion had been considerable, especially before the battle fully erupted. After all, before launching the blood trident enveloped by flames, Bai Zimin was very clear that if he failed to kill a First Order creature with a single shot, the odds of survival would plummet immediately. Therefore, although he appeared serene on the surface, he was actually under great mental pressure. Meanwhile, Shang Guanbing Shui was looking at him with a frown and her eyes seemed hesitant about something. However, soon her attention was drawn by the person beside her. Bing Shui, are you really okay? What happened inside that forest? Chen He asked, still not feeling calm. Thanks to the treasure Bai Zimin gave me earlier, I'm fine. She nodded softly and observed the surroundings as she slowly explained what happened inside the forest. What? Several dozen First Order beasts? And Bing Shui, you're already level 25. Chen He exclaimed in fright and looked at her with wide eyes when he heard that she had killed a First Order creature single-handedly. But even more so, he was frightened to hear that there were so many terrifying beings inhabiting the mutated forest. Only now did Chen He realize how lucky he was to get out of that place alive yesterday. Yes. Shang Guanbing Shui nodded a bit distractedly. She looked at Bai Zimin, who was resting with his eyes closed, and couldn't help but be surprised. Currently, she had already reached level 25 and had also received the message from the soul record in which she received a number of options to choose her job. Shang Guanbing Shui naturally knew that advancing was not easy. However, seeing the destruction of the surroundings, the corpses of the first-order beasts scattered on the ground and some of them in miserable conditions, Shang Guanbing Shui finally fully accepted that the young man before her was simply a monster in human skin. Bai Zimin opened his eyes and sighed as he pulled out a chocolate bar from his backpack. However, before he began to eat it, he took out 3 more bars along with 4 cans of soda. He threw a bar and a can to each of them as he said with a somewhat exhausted smile, "Good job, everyone." Chen He, Shang Guanbing Shui, and Liang Peng looked at each other before shrugging their shoulders. The 3 of them casually sat or simply stood and began to replenish their energies with bright expressions. No matter how small it was, everyone did their part today, being able to overcome the most difficult challenge since the apocalypse broke out and the world changed. A single mistake could have ended the whole group and the annihilation of nearly 500 people as well as the hope of many others. Therefore, they were naturally happy even if they did not say anything. Shang Guanbing Shui even thanked Bai Zimin for trusting her enough to lend her such a valuable treasure, to which he responded with a casual smile. As for the matter of saving her life earlier, she said nothing and he did not mention it either. They both seemed to understand each other's mind tactically, so words were unnecessary. After properly resting for nearly 30 minutes, Bai Zimin began to replenish his blood supply under the watchful eyes of the others. Although it was unpleasant, there was no choice in the matter and he didn't want to die just because he didn't want to do some dirty work. ******. The survivors were waiting anxiously inside the first floor of the library building under the care of XIETIAN and the rest. The atmosphere in the place was extremely heavy and there seemed to be a black cloud over everyone's head as no one dared to speak, and even those who spoke did so quietly in extremely small whispers. Occasionally, the eyes of the 400-plus survivors would unconsciously turn to the entrance of the building with hopeful eyes. However, each time their eyes receded in disappointment at not finding the people they were looking for, increasing the worry they felt even more. "How do you think the battle ended?" a male student asked quietly as his eyes drifted to the door. "I don't know. There's been no roaring and no explosions anywhere for a while now." Another survivor whispered back as he looked at Fu Suifeng and the others before continuing, "I bet the battle is already over. Besides, even the 4 of them are moving anxiously and looking towards the door, so obviously what the group leaders are doing is not simple." "How could it be simple?" Lin, who was sitting nearby, overheard the conversation and couldn't help but raise her voice, scared. "They are facing an army of dreadful beasts that are as strong or stronger than that strange blue-skinned zombie." Lin, just like the rest, was incredibly scared. No. She was even more scared. Because she was aware of the danger the 4 leaders were facing this time. Therefore, she couldn't stop some words from slipping out of her mouth unconsciously. "Blue-skinned zombie? What do you mean?" The surrounding survivors became agitated upon hearing those words and looked at Lin for responses. In order to keep the chaos as controlled as possible, one person had proposed not to reveal the existence of the first-order beasts or monsters until the group had enough power to safely deal with them. Otherwise, letting the survivors know that there were even more terrifying enemies on the outside could cause some of them to go crazy and start losing their minds, making things difficult for everyone. "Lin." Wu Yujun called out, startling her friend. She had been the person who had planned the idea and it was approved by Bai Zimin, Shang Guanbing Shui, Chen He, and Liang Peng right away, as the 4 of them were aware of something so basic. Seeing Wu Yujun's serious and angry look, Lin realized that she had spoken too much and quickly lowered her head in embarrassment but still frightened. Seeing Wu Yujun intervene, none of the survivors pressed the matter further as they knew that she was technically like a sister to Shangguan Bingshui, so no one dared to offend her. However, Li Na's words had already aroused the alertness of some people and the atmosphere quickly began to worsen. Although no one did anything stupid or wild as yesterday's massacre was still firmly etched in everyone's mind, they all began to look towards the entrance in fear, waiting for the final verdict of their fates. Wu Yujun also looked towards the entrance of the building and her beautiful big eyes glittered with slight apprehension, not only for herself but also for the safety of those who faced danger out there. While it was true that the sound of battle had ceased several minutes ago, only based on the terrifying roars and thunderous bangs, as well as the constant shaking of the ground, she knew that the battle that was currently raging was of such a magnitude that her mind was unable to comprehend even if it was explained to her in words.